just a few moments, with any luck, just to figure out that we're not hosting Mela anymore, and then we're good to go. We'll be on the air. We'll be live.
Imagine hosting Mela.
Yeah, I mean it's a mistake, to be frank.
Yeah.
It is, and that will now be rectified.
You know, we look good. Just saying, we all look pretty good.
Yeah, you know, we look
nice.
good. You know, it's good to look good. It feels good to look good.
Damn good.
It really does.
I think we've all gotten rid of our Corona haircuts, haven't we?
Yeah, well, I certainly have. The quarantine hair has been very much dispelled.
Feels good.
It does feel good. It does indeed.
I had to do it myself.
Wow. That's
Looks
hardcore addition, actually. That's
I mean, it's been growing back for a while, so you can't see all the mistakes, which is convenient.
Well.
Okay, but welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another very special edition of TeaTime. Of course, joining me is Angeels and CMC, and what better time for this than directly after the monthly automated tournament that happened yesterday. And I think that it's pretty safe to say there were some fairly interesting developments in the playstyles and a few of the classes that we started to see creep back in to a few of those compositions there for Guild Wars 2 Conquest PvP. And today we're going to be talking about kind of a bit of a general state of the game thing. Our last TeaTime with CMC kind of turned into a bit of a weird Q&A format where quite a lot of the questions ended up being not really able to be talked about because, you know, we can't leak everything, guys. Okay, we can't do all of it, just a little bit. But this one is going to be more of a kind of round table or triangular table, as there's only three of us, discussion just regarding the game. And we'll also bring you guys into the mix there a little bit, and we'll maybe take some questions and we can open the discussion up a little bit towards the end of the show there. And, of course, I have a little bit of I did actually send out a tweet and people asked a few questions there. Not all of them are actually appropriate, shall we say, for the TeaTime, but we'll do our best. We will do our best to address the concerns of the community here. And there we go. See, look, there you go. Wild Wells nerfed and trait removed. Many people love that. See, I mean, it's immediately we have the question there, but we're not gonna do questions just yet, guys. So save them, because you might have a chance, okay, to have those addressed later on the show. But to start things off, welcome, Angeels and CMC. It is wonderful to have you both here. Looking very HD as well, Angeels, actually over there.
Oh yeah, I've stolen. I've stolen a setup. It's not mine, guys, clearly, because mine is like traditionally way more scuffed. And I prefer the more scuffed setup. You can't even hear my keyboard, which is disappointing for a lot of you, I know. Teapot's loving it though, so yeah, it's fantastic.
It feels good. It really feels good.
I feel a little bit out of place with my, let's see, 8-year-old 720p Logitech webcam.
That's good. That's good.
It is good. And
so,
I mean,
but it's only 7 years
we
old.
wouldn't want that Wii plushie any more HD, really, would we?
True.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the best part of my setup.
So, I do want to talk about kind of most of the classes, if not all of them. Okay, maybe we'll just leave out Mirage to piss them off as much as possible. But you know, where I want to start off is actually some of the changes to kind of like the side node meta that we actually saw in the monthly automated tournaments, actually, because I think a lot of people thought that the nerfs to Condi Revenant might not be enough to actually nudge it out of the meta, and that's probably true, right? It saw play all the way through to the grand finals of the monthly, but we did actually see a few other options creeping in, actually, in the tournament. There was a lot of Ranger play, actually, a Druid build as well, a Soul Beast, Base Ranger, and Druid also play. And, of course, there was one Spellbreaker from Goku. He was making that work all the way to the end there as well. And I think that sort of thing kind of indicates that the Condi Rev nerfs were perhaps a little bit more impactful than we perhaps predicted. And maybe players also understand it a little bit more and are able to play into it a little bit more. So I think that's quite interesting to see the side node meta develop. And I think like the kind of the opening question and the opening area of discussion I want to go is a little bit about side noding classes, so stuff like Warrior Ranger, Condi Rev, and all that sort of thing. Like, where do we want to see this go? Because do we want to see Condi Rev continue to come down a little bit there, or do we want to bring up other sidenoders? Because one thing that you do see is that sidenoders, basically non-Condi Revs and, well, non-scrappers, as it turns out, actually, I forgot to mention that one, have a bit of a trouble just kind of surviving the plus. Right, like surviving the plus is quite difficult in the side node meta right now. It's not uncommon to see the thief come in and just boom, get a kill, particularly with that devastating combo of the Hollowsmith with the grenades coming in there as well. And well, without talking too much there as well, what do you guys think about where side noders are right now, and where is kind of the direction we're going to see them going forwards in Guild Wars 2 PvP?
So I think, kind of to start off with, it's better to talk about the second aspect. It's like where we kind of want to see them going, because I think that's sort of the direction that we saw maybe, well, at the finals of the monthly yesterday, namely Scrapper, and that it does some damage, but it also survives. But it's not undefeatable, kind of like how Condi Rev was in the Moto, right? And I think that's going to be a lot more interesting in terms of side notes, because we are going to see those 1v1s pushed a bit more, and it is more relevant for the +1 to occur, outside of just purely pushing it when you have a massive node or kill advantage on the map. So I think it's certainly more exciting long term, but we do need to see some more diversity going into this, because truth be told, I think Scrap is going to be pretty dominant. I expect that we will see some more Condi Rev nerfs at some point in the future, because it is a vastly overperforming build. And at that point, Scrap is going to be pretty dominant on those side nodes, because it does just beat out Ranger, which is the other big side node class, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in general, the direction we want to go with side noders is that the fights should end. Like if you have a 1v1 against a side noder versus side noder, someone should be able to win that fight. We don't want the case of like stalemating, and pluses can influence that, obviously, but just having the ability to outplay and win the 1v1 is a lot more fun and a lot more interesting. And it's kind of, I mean, it's been a pretty big problem over the history of the game, even looking back to like DDLE stalemates back in the day. And like you still get the impact of the plus coming in and forcing that fight, but it's less exciting for the side noders to actually just stare at each other for a while, pop some cooldowns, do a little bit of button pressing, but not making a whole lot of progress. So, and I think a lot of the changes that we made since February have been a lot more sustained focused, and even on the stuff we did to Condi Rev, and not necessarily touching the resistance as much as people would have liked to see, but reducing their sustain, reducing some of their protection, reducing just their defensive capabilities in general, so that it is more possible to kill them. And I mean, we probably didn't get all the way there, which not really surprising, but there's obviously more work to do in most cases for most things. So,
yeah, and there's going to be that incremental approach. I'm sure, as there always is. Like it can be fun to swing the nerf bat and completely demolish something, but Condi Rev, it is quite an oppressive build right now, and I think you raise a really good point there, CMC, about it just. You can't kill it in the 1v1, right? That you might as well just AFK, and that's something that you really want to avoid. Certainly less so now, right? You can at least kind of force decaps with it. A few builds can actually kind of get rid of it, at least off the node temporarily. But actually killing it can be a really difficult thing, indeed. But it's not that it shouldn't exist. It just needs to exist in a different form. Like particularly the resistance uptime is something that is very very difficult to deal with, like, very unfun, and a bit of a problem design wise, right? I
mean, resistance, everyone calls out resistance because it's kind of an unfun mechanic, and I won't really disagree. Like it's very binary. Either I have resistance and I'm Condi immune, or I don't have resistance and I'm getting destroyed by Condis. So it was kind of like the thing that everyone was looking at with the July update was, it's time to nerf resistance on Condi Rev, because it's just not fun. And we kind of went a different direction because, well, there are a couple reasons. Like Condi Rev is supposed to be kind of more of the anti-Condi build, and that's not to say it should have 100% resistance uptime, but it should have more resistance than most other things. So we tried to keep like the general design goal of Rev intact while bringing it down in some other aspects, because there were other things that are just that were still overtuned on Rev that could come down. So generally when we're looking at stuff, it's like there's change that maybe is the correct change, but then there's also reasons not to do the correct change for whether it's design philosophy or because we want to see what's going to happen on the other when we touch something else. It's not necessarily saying that we always make the right decision, and obviously like resistance is still pretty unfun, so maybe we should have hit resistance in the July update instead of sustain and then followed up with sustain nerfs if the resistance changes weren't enough. But there's definitely a reason for it, and there was definitely some impact from the kind of sustain defense nerfs, which is good. But it's very much balancing how fun resistance is as well. Like, fun is a non-trivial amount of balancing a game, right? Like, if you can have the most balanced game in the world, but nothing's fun to play, and it's like, okay, well, that's
no, fun's important.
Balance. So, like, if you have something with such a high resistance uptime like Condi Rev that creates like just bad gameplay experiences, it's definitely worth following up with some additional changes there.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that Resistance kind of has done is it's really eliminated, like, perhaps a Condi build coming in. Not that we really have a lot of other Condi builds other than Condi Rev really in play right now. Obviously, Mirage was hit pretty hard by having a single dodge and is not really playable in that duelist or side node element right now. But it also just... It doesn't allow for the Condi Rev 1v1, the mirror matchup, to really have a finale either, because both apply condition damage and therefore counter each other in a sense. And I think it's going to be really good, even if Condi Rev maybe was nerfed too much in the future. It'd be interesting to see how viable it would be in its mirror matchup from this point onwards. If that makes sense.
I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say that some adjustments to Condi Rev resistance will be coming, and whether or not that makes the build unplayable because of the other nerfs that have happened. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, and if it needs to be brought up again, then it comes back up. It's like balance has very little to do with any individual patch. Like, the game will probably break horribly in some way or another, but we're going to follow up with another patch.
Yeah, of course.
Incrementally make the game better, right? That's the general
precisely
philosophy.
Yeah,
One thing I did want to.
Oh, go ahead.
One thing I did want to point out though is I think what we've actually noticed most is player innovation since the Condi Rev nerfs, more than the Condi Rev nerfs necessarily having the biggest effect. I mean, obviously the biggest factor being the scrapper buff, so to speak, in the last patch, really bringing that build into play. But we have started to see players kind of trying to play around, trying to find a ranger build that is able to play against it, and druid, obviously. So I think it's great to see.
Guardian,
Guardian, of course. Core Guardian. I think Core Guardian is a big one actually. It's a
bit of a sleeper.
It's one I really hope CMC you've taken note of, because I see that Core Guardian build on a node. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm out of here. See you later, guys. It's just not worth your time at all. Yeah, no, it's good to see. It's good to see players coming up with some different options to kind of counter this.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best state for the game to be in, is the one where nothing is oppressive enough that you don't feel like you want to innovate.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Before Condi Rev felt so dominant, it's like, why am I doing anything other than Condi Rev? There's no point.
Mm-hmm.
But even if something is suboptimal, just trying it out and figuring out more about how the game is playing is just really good. And even Grenade Hollow was something that came fairly late. It wasn't since February dominating the meta. It was more of like a later innovation that ended up being very effective for the MOTA. And then people have jumped on as... I mean, it definitely needs to come down, right? Like, a Grenade kit does a lot of damage, but it wasn't so oppressive that it was immediately obvious in February that we're just spamming Grenade kit for 5 months, and it's a huge problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It was, I think, a big part of the Grenade Hollow's effectiveness as well was the playstyle that Rank 55 came up with, like pairing it with the Thief, right? In particular, the Power Thief, because everyone was kind of on the Condi Thief train at the time, right? It was like, oh, Condi Thief is going crazy. It's going to ruin the MOTA. It's terrible, right? But it turns out, if you actually just walk to far every single game with a Power Thief and a Nade Hollow, they're just dead, right? Even Condi Rev is dead, actually, as it turns out. And yeah, and I think, and that kind of, that's the real kind of macro point here to talk about, is that it's much easier to, from the developer perspective, right? To understand how to balance the game and how to approach making the game balanced and fun. Is because if the players are actually figuring it out and developing these strategies, so you can actually find out what is good, right? It's, grenade kit, it's been there for a while, right? Like grenade kit, it has been sitting around, but no one tried it, right? Until then. And then away you go. You create this quite meme-tastic build, which is quite the menace, I think it would be fair to say. There as well. And this is something, because I want to talk about Warrior a little bit and, kind of the general side node thing as well. I think one of the things that really does scare a lot of side noders is when something like a grenade hollow comes in just to grab you. Like, it's very difficult to survive against that. And I think that if you nerf down grenade hollow and some of these very quite mobile, very aggressive, bursty builds, you're going to start to see stuff like Warrior and Ranger become a little bit better just kind of by default. Otherwise, you're just going to be playing the game of like, how good can we make mending before Warrior just becomes dominant again, right? Like,
there's one thing. Full cleanse good enough on mending.
There's one thing I wanted to pick up.
Really good now, actually.
I mean, it's a
mending
good ability.
Is very good heal skill. Yeah. There's one thing I wanted to pick up on what you just said, Teapot, and I think it's mobility. I think that's the big factor. We have specs like Repo, right? They do a lot of damage, but they're quite slow to get across the map. And that's compared to a spec like Hollow, which has a lot of damage, probably equals amount, but it's very fast with that near permanent super speed, the leap, etc. And I think if we could see some changes back, that toning some of that mobility back and kind of reserve that for classes that have very high spike damage, but it's limited in its output, then we would see a more healthy side node meta emerge, which I think would be good.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other obvious thing there as well would also be stealth, particularly the Shadow Arts trait line, because the thief can be a little bit difficult to truly predict where it is because it's a very fast class. And I'm not saying we should nerf thief mobility. I think that is Thief's niche, right? It is its capacity to move around there, but that enables it in Conquest, right? It enables it to be good. And I think that's fine. But the fact that you have this essentially like amazing sustain to this build that can also move around and can come out of nowhere and be quite difficult, to play around. Is what makes Thief very, 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 very strong right now, actually. So I think that would also kind of assist with the side node meta as well, being able to survive the thief a little bit better and be able to kind of counterplay around the thief a little bit more, because stealth is a pretty binary mechanic. If you're stealth, I can't see you, right? You're just going to come out of nowhere. You're going to steal me and stab me in the back, and I'm going to be really sad. And that's a difficult thing to handle. I
mean, it's particularly problematic in ranked queue, right? Because in an AT, you're on voice comms. It's very easy to keep track of the thief between all your teammates, right? But when you're in that ranked situation, you're not keeping an eye on the map 100% of the time. You're maybe in a 1v1 or something. It's going to be difficult to keep track of that thief, and if he jumps you, it's going to be really tough. So I think that there does need to be some toning back of thief a little bit, but also I think we need to see more classes fulfilling that roamer +1 role. That's for sure. I think that would be more healthy as well. Heck, even Mirage, right?
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to like Shadow Arts trade line in particular, we kind of saw a little bit with the changes we made in the July update was trying to reduce some of the damage that comes from the lifesteal that you get from that trade line, because Shadow Arts is supposed to be that additional stealth, a little bit more survivability, more defensive trait line for Thief, right? And I think the problem that we've run into is that it's not enough of a loss to take the defensive trait line on Thief, because Shadow Arts has kind of always been pretty good. And even way back in the day, I mean, it's a little bit stronger now, but back in the day, you still had like a lot of sustain from Shadow Rejuvenation. You still had a lot of stealth coming out from all the traits there. And just no one played it because you couldn't kill anyone when you're playing Shadow Arts. And you needed the damage from Deadly Arts, you needed the damage from crit strikes. And so you couldn't afford to take like this super kind of do nothing trait line it was seen more like at the time. And I mean, we don't want it to be like a completely do nothing trait line in the sense that you never want to take this, but you should want to take a damage trait line on Thief to actually kill people. I think is a general thought that we want to push a little bit harder, because if I'm taking full Shadow Arts, it's harder to kill me as a Thief, and I'm still getting enough value to push through side noders or push through on my +1s in general. And then it's just not worth. Why take more damage if I can just not take damage and be just as effective? So we tried to pull a little bit of damage out of Shadow Arts to see if that was enough to kind of push people away. It's possible that it still has a little bit too much utility. But we would, when it comes to like the roaming bursty DPS Thief, I'd rather see Deadly Arts or Crit Strikes on as the third trait line, because then you do have something that you're giving up.
Yeah, for sure. I think that will be definitely the way to go. There as well. You know, perhaps we'll see some changes to those trait lines there as well. I think that's kind of the goal again with the
got like a couple of crit strikes buff in there on July. You got like 5% extra crit chance on Keen Observer. It's only going to change everything. 50 extra ferocity on.
I think that's it's very in line with what you originally wanted in the February or January patch, right? Where if you do want to do damage, you have to take the damage trait lines. Because you're not going to be able to just get it purely from the stats of your amulet or the just innate power scaling of all these weapon skills. So I think that would be really solid if you're forced to run these damage trait lines. If you want to do something, right? I think it makes it a lot fairer in general.
Well, and there's something else you could potentially talk about there as well, and I think a few. Well, actually, no. Let me rephrase that. I think a lot of builds right now kind of have the ability to get away with running Berserker Amulet, right, as well. Which means they have this massive damage output. They kind of get away with it because they're very, very slippery. They have a lot of mobility, which kind of feeds into that issue again, right? We see that, Nade's Hollow probably wouldn't be quite as terrifying if it wasn't running a Berserker Amulet, right? With just this insane damage output. And Thief is in a similar situation, right? It has a lot of sustain from its innate kit, right? And that means it can say, I'm going to run Berserk. I'm just going to get you with my epic ferocity, and it uses this divinity rune to kind of compensate for that, in addition to its trait lines. So if you kind of take away a little bit of a piece there, right, and say, okay, now you're going to have to rely on an amulet to give you a little bit more sustainability, a little bit more durability, instead of just having a lot of it innate because of your trait lines, while still having this very powerful roaming capacity. And I think that would be a potential option there as well.
I think though there's got to be that. It's got to be done within reason, because I think a good example for why that's maybe not the best idea would be Scrapper pre the recent buff, where you lost 180 vitality and all you gained for it was 15% damages converted to barrier. Now, before the change to the trait on last Tuesday, it was just not. You just didn't ever generate enough barrier in order to make up for that. That more damage orientated survivability, and I think that's problematic. That's problematic if you go down that route. There's a fine balance where that's okay, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not and you like that negative 300 vitality, Angeels. You like that? That's
that was so brutal, man.
That's good.
It ruined such a great build too.
And over nerfs and under nerfs are going to happen, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Inevitability of how balance goes.
Look, it's impossible to hit that bullseye every single time. I think we can all appreciate that.
No, but anyway, kind of going back to the topic. I want to talk about Warrior. What do you guys think about Warrior right now in PvP? Particularly the side node, because I'll tell you what, guys, like Heal Breaker, like Shout Breaker in ranked, it's a monster, dude, okay? It is a monster, my friends. But let's talk about the side node one here, seeing as we're on the side node topic here. From there, like, what do you guys think about kind of Warrior's place in the meta and where it's going, where it's come from? Some general thoughts on that. What do you think?
Wait, well, CMC's a warrior main, so whilst I collect my thoughts, he can.
I mean, I'm not a warrior main. I just primarily play warrior since.
So you're warrior main.
Heart of Thorns.
Okay.
Definitely still an Ellie main though. never forget the good old days of. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that DDLE was overtuned back in the day, but it was mostly overtuned. It was not really a
I think
mechanical problem. But we don't need to talk about 2013. Like, there's no point. As much as that would be a fun conversation as well. To get all the old guard in here and talk about Selly meta days. No, sorry.
I think Warrior fills that spot where it's just a bit underpowered, but it's also unfun. Like, I'm gonna get flack for that, but I'll be honest.
You're gonna piss the Warrior mains off, dude. I can see them already. They're typing, dude. They're typing.
Is not fun. It's not a fun mechanic, okay? And it's not. I'm okay. I'll go even further with this. All right. I'm not even playing Nade Hollow, okay? So it's not even a matter of me just spamming stuff. I'm playing Scrapper. Like, it's just not fun to engage with on any level. So yeah, it very much puts the ball onto the offense of the enemy player, right? As opposed to it being skillfully used by the warrior. And yes, of course, at the higher end, the skillful warrior will use it more effectively. But the reality is that it doesn't require that in order to be effective. So I think that there needs to be. I'd rather see core warrior in play, to be honest. It just seems more engaging. The animations are very clear, and yeah, it just needs some sustain. The damage it outputs is solid already.
Yeah, like Warrior's damage is actually quite good. If you're not paying attention, if you get caught, Warrior will destroy you. Right? If they land bulls charging you, you don't have a stun break. They land 100 blades. They get arcing slice.
Yeah.
And you're gonna have a very, very bad time, an extremely bad time. And well, the Berserker, okay, Berserker in ranked. My goodness, okay? Like, sometimes I see my team, they run towards the Berserker, and the Berserker kills all of them, right? I mean, Warrior has damage, right? It's not that. It's just that it does have a slight hard time in actually surviving and competing with the survival of other classes, particularly in the side node scenario there as well. Vans runs a defense spell break. I mean, dude, he was in fact the only warrior to play in the motor, I believe. Actually, he played the defense spell breaker build. It wasn't quite enough, unfortunately, to qualify the team. But no, it did see play, and I think the trouble is with defense is that if you do that, you do give up. You lose a lot of damage, right? If you go in that direction. So you do get the sustain from defense, and you can be a little bit durable, but I mean, the defense trait line got memed very hard, right?
It was built. To be honest, it was built on mainly passive.
Exactly,
so
the double passive.
Yeah.
So
and it's definitely one of those that needs to be probably reworked at some point.
Yeah, and that's certainly a topic we can get into there because, I'm not sure if that's something we can really discuss that much here today, actually, with regards to trait reworks. But there are a few passive traits that got the old CMC treatment, and they probably need to be replaced at some point because I love a 300-second cooldown. That's great, it's so useful. I love it when all the traits are 300-second cooldowns. In fact, actually, I think actually not quite actually, but the Arcane Ellie master trait, you have a choice between like the res trait, which I guess is not horrible actually, but you've got like a 1% revive, and then you've also got a 300-second arcane shield cooldown. So you've only got one choice left after that. So a few trait lines they've suffered at the hands of the balancing there. They've been punished.
I've definitely slotted Last Stand since February. And not felt super happy about it.
Yeah.
You gotta get that stance duration and figure on stance. Still does a couple things, even if you...
Yeah, at least it has that.
I'm not saying it's good. Yeah. You probably just take Cleansing Eye or Arouse Resilience, but I've tried it. Get that extra 1 second on
Defiant stance, that's big.
That extra half second on Defy Power, whatever it's called.
In terms of like Warrior, I think... Like, as a side note, it kind of falls off because it doesn't have the sustain to hang with the rest of them. But, I'm very much echoing things that have already been said, that the damage is good. I don't think Warrior is too far off, and it's probably doesn't even need to get that many buffs, if any. It's more of like bringing the meta side noders down, and that just gives Warrior an opportunity to do something there. maybe it needs a little bit of sustain. Like adrenal health is definitely something we could give back a little bit because it is kind of a more fair way to get sustain. Like if I dodge Arctic Slice, I dodge Breaching Strike, I am essentially dodging their sustain, which is good. Like I think adrenal health is a pretty good mechanic. It plays a little poorly with longbow, but people don't really play longbow anymore, so it's less of a problem, and it's probably something we could give back. So that defense is the more viable as a side noder, and you do lose damage, but our general plan for side noders is to kind of reduce the sustain a little bit. So you don't necessarily need to go as heavy into damage to, hopefully, you won't need to go as heavy into damage to win those side node 1v1s, and it'll just be more of a longer battle of attrition that you can punch through their sustain even with defense because it is a little bit lower. But, I mean, you could still bring Warrior to the team fight and play Berserker, man. 2-second Endure Pain on Berserk stance? Totally playable. It's not, but, like Berserker is probably less of a side noder than it used to be, but I think Condi Berserker has the opportunity to kind of bring that Heart of Thorns build back, and it's not quite there. I mean, it suffers a lot from defense being a bit worse because you are going to go for that more sustaining build. But I would like to see Condi Berserker as a side noder, Power Berserker as a team fighter,
or Warrior. See Condi Berserker back. That and Condi Chrono, that'd be great.
Condi Berserker was pretty fun, I think. I mean,
it was fun.
I preferred Power Berserker during Hot, even like when it was worse, and then it kind of got kind of close near the end. It was kind of a choice.
I saw Goku. I saw Goku play Condi Berserker actually in an 80. I was like, this is a bit questionable. Then he went far and one-shot the enemy ranger with 1,000 conditions on Skull Grinder. So I was like, oh wow,
that's good.
I stand corrected, right? I mean, he got the job done.
Yeah, and I mean, like the great thing about Berserker is it was always kind of like, sure, Skull Grinder is overtuned, but it's pretty fair. Like you dodge Skull Grinder, and like
yeah. No, I mean,
mind blown.
It actually was though, and I feel that Condi Chrono fell into that bracket as well. Dodge the shield 4. That became the gameplay, and I think that's really fair. And it's good that you have those big skills that you kind of are forced to react to, because a lot of what's kind of happened is that you have all these skills and all of them you have to react to, as opposed to a 1 or 2. And hopefully we can see kind of a return to that style of gameplay.
Yeah. It's certainly something that is the story of the way that the game has suffered from a little bit of power creep, is that every ability becomes incredibly impactful. And they're all coming at you all at the same time. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is going to really stress my V key here, I'm afraid. And kind of going back to the slightly slower paced gameplay with just a few really important abilities to handle, I think would certainly be a good direction there as well. But
yeah, I mean, we tried to do a little bit with that with the February patch. Obviously, it's a lot bigger project than was one that's going to be solved in
absolutely
1 patch or even 2 patches. But like, absolutely, I think we totally agree on this. And I hate to just go back to the good old days of DDLE, but like,
it was good content.
They're going to kill you when they're on fire, and otherwise, I mean, you could get lightning whip spammed to death, but otherwise, there's a good back and forth of like pressure versus the nice reprieve you have when they swap out of fire. And it's like all the fire skills were pretty fair. Dodge burning speed, dodge fire grab. Feels pretty good, honestly. Like you're going to get punished when you make mistakes, and the problem with DDLE was that you couldn't really punish it because it just had way too much sustained defense on top of that. But going back to that kind of style, and like the Berserkers, the DDLEs, even like power Mesmer back in core, like dodge Illusionary Berserker, dodge Mirror Blade. These big plays to like the big damage skill as the big play. Dodge this, avoid this, to not die is kind of like what made the game so great. And so
it
would be nice to kind of push further toward that style as we can, but I don't think we're ever going to get back to, say, core times. That's not necessarily realistic, but trying to better distinguish like damage skills from utility skills from mobility skills to create those important moments is something we've been trying to do, and there's obviously a lot more work to do.
I think that also ties into the topic of what we were talking about earlier, which is like the fun factor. Because I do feel that it gets considerably more fun when you can maybe, we in HOT, particularly during Pro League, we saw a lot of like the baiting gameplay, canceling canceling skills to kind of, bait the opponent into dodging and all that. And I do feel that gameplay is kind of diminished. It's not nearly as prevalent nowadays. But I also think that made it a lot more fun and engaging to play because it was skillful at that stage. And it felt good to beat your opponent because you completely outskilled them.
Yeah, that's the kind of the key thing. You never want to feel like, oh, that was bullshit, right? I mean, it's inevitable that it's going to be a little bit like that sometimes, right? But you want to minimize that experience, thinking like, oh my goodness, I could not have done anything there, right? You want to make sure that the game is always, a very engaging experience, and you don't feel like you're just getting like memed into oblivion there, right? Counterplay is very important in any kind of competitive setting there as well. And there was one thing that that was very briefly touched upon there, like with the Berserker being the team fighter thing, and I wanted to bring something up that's kind of been around for a very, very long time, and it's the team fight duo, right, has kind of always been Necro and some kind of support, right? And I think, the idea that Berserker could almost kind of fit the Necromancer role in a way, right? Like have an alternative for that. And just in general, having alternatives for other roles is something that I think would be really, really good to have in the game. And I think we are probably pushing towards that. I can kind of see some of the design vision there as well for Guild Wars 2 PvP. There is having different alternatives, right? And we can talk about this one as well in a little bit, like after we're done with Warrior. But like kind of right now, like if you want some like really heavy map pressure, like your choice is Thief, right? And you used to have Mesmer as well. Like you could have like this big playmaker of the Mesmer with the portal, right? Which you don't see as much anymore now. But I think we are moving towards an era where we are going to have more options, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of diversifying different ways to fill these roles, like team fighter, roaming, map pressure, playmaker. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, CMC, like where we're going with that, and if you have any plans, any schemes you could perhaps shed some light on there in the future about that.
Yeah, I mean, diversity is the ideal. Like, it would be great if everything was playable in some fashion. And that doesn't mean that every class is a team fighter or every class has a side noder, but having more than one optimal choice, even more than two optimal choices, more than three optimal choices, gets you into the state where you can start trying new things. And so how we actually get there, I mean, I couldn't give you any specifics really, but looking at the classes like Necromancer, like Reaper, the team fighters are typically these slightly slower, not a lot of sustain, but the big AoE pressure. You have some in-fight mobility to kind of chase down if you need to, but you're not going to be running long distances like a Thief. But you're going to be like more reliant on that support character, and so you're going to be more focused on damage. So something like Power Berserker, looking at like Arc Divider, or looking at Arcane Slice even, going more of like this all-in character that is going to need a support class to keep them alive in a team fight. That is very much what Necro does in a lot of cases. Yeah. And Berserker is a very easy thing to point out and be like, hey, this is a great idea, but how are we going to push something like... I mean, does Ellie have a chance to get back in there? It's probably a little bit more difficult. Weaver, maybe not as big on the AoE. Well, Condi Weaver has a little bit more of that AoE pressure, but it's also more of just a sustain, more natural to go to the side node role. And Corelli, it's kind of a bit more of a bruiser as well, but I think there's room to bring bruisers back into the teamfight meta as well. Like even looking back at the Selly meta where it was 5 bruisers, you could still teamfight and you could still combat the teamfight comp of like Guardian Necro at the time. Guardian Necro was just worse than all the Selly builds because they were so much better, but having that kind of dynamic of a bunch of bruisers and roamers against a more solidified teamfight comp is just kind of an interesting place for the game to be in general.
Okay.
And so making sure that both of those styles are playable would be great to see.
And I think maybe one of the reasons why you don't see that so much is because a lot of classes can kind of do multiple things, right? Like you can see that, for example, something like a Holosmith, right, is very, very good at roaming, right? But simultaneously, it's excellent for just annihilating stuff. Particularly something like a Firebrand, right, has a bit of a rough time versus something like the Holosmith, right? So it can be very difficult to play a full roaming comp because the dominant star right now that we see on both EU and NA with the Tempest, the Necromancer, a side noder of some kind, like Condi Rev or a Scrapper, and then with the Holosmith and the Thief, right? It's very, very good at team fighting, and you know at the high level, this is something that you particularly see in a lot of high level thieves, like Cinder or Toka, right? You'll see these thieves really get involved in the team fight as well, right? But the problem is that a lot of these classes are very capable in both of these situations. And like perhaps we need to see like a little bit less flexibility, a little bit less hybridization, as it were, right? In a lot of these classes to prevent that.
The issue I see, okay, is that it's very nice to kind of have the ability to play different comps with like different styles of gameplay, and it certainly makes things more interesting. But at the same time, I think that kind of balancing for that actually limits the progression of like newer players or less skilled players, because I think if there's too much diversity, then I do feel that if there was one standardized way of building a team comp, then players would know immediately to fulfill a certain role and know exactly what to do with it. Whereas with hybridization, it becomes less clear and limits the average player more. That's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty true that the side noder of today is a bit more diverse, and you can kind of wander into a larger fight and still get a lot of value. Where looking back at something like Condi Ranger was more of the premier side noder a long time ago, and it had a very little team fight value. You're not going to get your full shortbow value. You're not going to get your full axe value. I mean, Spirit Ranger had some value in team fights, but it was very much the side noders of yore were side noders, and they're not going to get value in team fights. Whereas today, most of your side noders are still getting value in team fights, so it kind of eliminates the need for a more specialized side noder, which I don't necessarily think is the worst. Like, it's going to create a little bit more ability to like rotate differently instead of being forced into a very specific pattern based off your comp, which I think is good. Like, if my side noder can go support the team fight if he needs to, then that opens the door for a lot more decisions to be made instead of following a very specific, say, flowchart of this is what needs to happen because this is how our comp plays, which I think is pretty healthy for the game.
Yeah, I think that would be fair. Yeah. Like, you know, having this slight blurring of the line between roles, like not having like very, very strict role definitions, does mean that your gameplay as an individual player is very flexible, right? Which can be enjoyable, right? Like being able to like, oh yeah, I can take this 1v1 at least for a little bit until my team gets here, instead of saying, well, I can't do this, right? Like my class just can't do that. That is certainly a positive thing for the balance, and as you say, it greatly increases the complexity of the approaches you can take to the game, for sure there. But we'll see how that develops there as time goes on there.
Yeah.
For some PvP action there as well. It's good. I think one comment I do want to make, and I kind of wanted to say this at the start, is that a lot of people really don't like the PvP meta right now. But honestly, I think it's actually quite good. Like it is quite impressively.
I think it's starting to be good.
Yeah.
I think it's starting to be good. Okay. I think if you were to kind of eliminate some of the strength of Hollow, then it would be solid because you'd have a couple of side node choices. Maybe Scrapper needs to be toned down a little bit. I'm looking at you, Flashbang, specifically. I've maintained for a while. I think Flashbang should be 1 second of blind. So it's a bit more skill requirement on the impact of that. You want to be hitting that directly when you want to be blinding something. But overall, I think it'll be pretty decent if Hollow gets shaved down a bit. The +1, the side node pressure from teams will be a bit limited. Thief is obviously overperforming a bit. But is that because Hollow is strong? That's a difficult one. So I think it will be solid in a bit, but we're starting to get that way. You're right.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what a positive message to spread here as well.
Yeah, exactly.
The chat maybe not agreeing with that entirely. A few grievances.
No, okay. Look, okay. Here's the thing about chat, right? Everyone is biased, okay? So of course I'm biased because I'm an engineer player, okay? I'm like, oh, you just play broken Hollow, you just play broken Scrap. Okay, so of course you're happy, Warrior mains, they're sad. Okay, Warrior mains are sad because Warrior is not broken. etc., etc., and the list goes on. So they're always going to be sad because their classes aren't in the sunshine. But in the grand scheme of things, if we're looking at it from a non-biased perspective, it's pretty solid in terms of diversity and viability for the most part.
Absolutely, and I think we have to kind of take into account that it can just take like someone to figure something out, or someone to come up with a different playstyle that enables a certain class to work quite well. I think something definitely of note would be Mirage. Actually, if you actually look at how much damage a good Mirage can do, it is quite scary. And in fact, I've been watching a bit of Helseth stream, and he actually says that Mirage is really good. Just all the Mesmer players are just incredibly bad. Now that is obviously that is Helseth, but right?
Did you see him losing to Blam in like 3 seconds?
That's true.
I'm just that statement.
Yeah, I did see that actually. I did see a bit of that lightning rod action. I mean, I think that just goes to show you how broken lightning rod really is, guys. Okay, like lightning rod needs the 0.01 treatment. I think, guys, it absolutely does.
CMC, how do you feel about this? Do you feel lightning rod's broken?
I don't think the damage is the issue with lightning rod. Like the whole point of the trait is to deal damage on CC, which kind of breaks against the philosophy of CC shouldn't do damage. But there's a couple of cases where the trait needs to exist, like Terror is another case where it needs to exist. I'm actively slotting this trait against something else, so we're not going to make it do 0 damage. Like,
it's a Grandmaster trait as well, and that should be like changing up the gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably more the weakness does a little bit too much on Lightning Rod, because there's a damage number where it works, but 3-second weakness on every CC, when especially something like Weaver has a lot of CC, there's just so much weakness uptime that I think that's more of the potential issue with Lightning Rod than the damage at this point.
Yeah. For sure, and it's the new design philosophy regarding damage with CCs does kind of throw a bit of a spanner in the works there as well. I think there are some potential solutions there. I mean, it might make it very, very clunky, but you could add like a slight delay to it, right? Like a lightning bolt will strike after like half a second or something like that, so you have at least a chance to maybe move out of the way or dodge it in some way to have a bit of counterplay into it. You don't like?
I'll be honest. Okay, I think
CC, right?
I think that
like a couple of them, but
I
don't think that's really the solution for Lightning Rod.
I think that CC doing damage through traits where it's an active choice, I think is solid. We see this on Scrapper with the I can't remember the trait name actually. It's been changed so many times, but the middle adept trait makes your function gyro do CC, and it does damage as well. And Lightning Rod also doing damage. It's not the worst thing ever because those are all numbers that can be easily tuned, and I think that's okay. But it's when it's every CC skill doing varying amounts of damage to the state that you're not really you kind of have to prioritize them as damage skills in their own right. That's the problematic, and that's where I think the philosophy of removing damage from CC was really, really good for the general game.
Yeah, and this is I think removing all of it in one go, that was kind of a okay, let's see how this works thing, and obviously I won't put words in CMC's mouth. We'll get his comment on this as well, but I think a lot of stuff you will start to see some particular crowd control interactions start to have damage again. I think Prime Light Beam, perhaps,
please bring it back.
Perhaps the the culprit, the obvious culprit there as well. So don't worry. Like, Blam is pissed by it. He's so mad. Look how angry he is, dude. Like, look at this. Look at this rage.
Oh my goodness.
And these Weaver mains, man. Seriously, they always cry so much. CMC, don't listen to them. Seriously, like in PvE, they're the biggest crybabies.
Entitled
well.
Ellie mains. That's what it is.
Oh dear.
I think this is a good point. A good opportunity to bring up like why certain decisions are made sometimes. Because I mean, looking at Blam's suggestion to just remove weakness from convergence, and then it's less of an issue on Lightning Rod. Sure, it's an option, but that's also a functional change that's going to impact the whole game. It's something that we're going to need to really discuss with the skills team, whether that makes sense. How does that affect the dagger kit? How does that affect any number of other things?
I mean, it also removes some support options from Sport Alley, right? The ability to mitigate some damage.
So I guess where I'm going with this is, generally we look at an opportunity to find a split that makes sense. And maybe it's not always the correct change. And I'm not saying that in this case, removing the weakness on conversion is the correct change. But there are cases where maybe there is a objectively correct, if there was no other considerations than PvP, maybe this is the right change. Just make a functional change here, and that's going to solve the problem in one way. But at the end of the day, that's not necessarily a viable option. It's certainly an option, but there are a much larger conversation that needs to happen. There's a lot more things that need to be considered, and most of the time we are going to look at finding a split that works. And sometimes that means the quote-unquote best change is not made. And sure, like I don't disagree. Sometimes we're going to make a change that maybe makes less sense because we're trying to make a split. We're trying to make a numbers change that can get a similar impact. And that's just kind of the reality of how we want to balance PvP and balance World v World is keep them more contained. If there are splits that make sense, we should try to push forward with splits. We should not try to change the functionality of the game. And sometimes it's going to make sense that we do need to change the functionality of the game. And that can definitely happen. But I don't think that like this is a case where that's true. Like removing weakness from convergence, whether or not it's the right change, it's like pretty low impact. Like this is not the game-breaking type thing that we want to make a big sweeping change to. And I mean, there's even the slight possibility to make functional splits, and we've done this a couple of times. We did this to Scourge in World v World back in December, where Sans Savant did not increase target cap in World v World only. That is a functional split that has changed the functionality of the trait. But it is a very extreme case where there was not a viable split. Like there is not something that we could touch on Scourge to make the 10 target cap of Sans Savant feel less oppressive. So we are going to make that change if it absolutely needs to happen. But most of the time, we do want to find the split that makes sense. And maybe it feels worse initially because it's like, oh, I didn't make the change that made actual sense. But we are trying to consider the entire game as we're making changes. So we are going to try to lean more heavily on splits if possible.
Yeah, and that's not to say there won't be. That's not to say there won't be reworks, guys. Like reworks, I think one of the things that is quite interesting, and I'd actually love to get into this a little bit later after we've kind of done like the general discussion for all the balance, is that it almost looks, and this is super cool, actually, I really like this design, is that the skills team appears to be kind of going through almost every trait line, or trying to, and giving each trait line almost like its own gimmick in a way, right? We see this with Death's Carapace, right, for death magic. We see Soldier's Focus. Yeah, Explosive Entrance on explosives. We see Soldier's Focus, right, on tactics, right? So you have every trait line, it almost like has like a very, very direct impact, adds another mechanic to your gameplay. It feels
almost like an elite specialization, in a sense, but a bit more budget, which I think, honestly, if it's done well, and it needs major balancing, because some of these are a bit busted, like the Corruption one and Explosive Entrance, but honestly, they're quite fun. They are quite fun to play with.
It's
and
cool.
I think that
and
they add
like
something.
Neither of those, the two things you just said, Explosive Entrance and Invoke Torment, what is that trait even called? I don't know. Whatever it is, the Corruption trait.
Yeah.
Like they're not mechanically problems. It's just a question of, does it do too much? Is the damage too high? Does it apply too much torment? Does it apply too much resistance? Yada yada yada. Like the mechanic is solid. Maybe it just needs to be tuned a little bit. And I think, like I'm kind of on the same page. I'm pretty excited by a lot of those kind of trait line reworks that have been made. I think the direction is really solid.
For sure. It's one I really, really enjoy, and I always get a little bit excited whenever I see in the patch notes that a trait like completely changes something. Like you take this trait and it does it changes one ability into a completely another ability. Oh, I always get excited, right? I mean, I love that stuff. It's super, super cool part of the game design.
I'd love to see some of these passive traits actually turned into those slightly more exciting traits.
Yeah. And, you know, we touched on this earlier, but that's very likely. I think we are going to see these kind of dead traits, right, get reworked away from that passive design, because I think that's another design philosophy that that not only CMC has, but also just the overall skills team as well, is to move away from passive gameplay and make as much active as possible within the context of the game, right? So you're not just going, oh yeah, I get my passive procs. No, it's going to be you have to actively use these, right? Which I think is very, very exciting indeed. That's exactly where things need to be going there. For the game, in my opinion, though, which is pretty cool. You know, it's not bad. It's not bad at all.
I saw some people complaining about the 300-second cooldowns for some of these things, but I think that these people don't quite understand that that's the point. It's the point that you're not supposed to use them because they're they have such a high cooldown.
I really wanted to go with 999 second cooldown.
Oh, really?
They wouldn't let you do it.
The point is that as unfortunate as it is, and like I'm not really happy with having to make that change, but like the whole point is that you don't take that trait and it's just unplayable. That's literally the point of the change, is to make the trait unplayable, because we don't want to see those passives having a large impact on people. And so 999 would have been like maybe a more humorous value to put in there.
I mean, how many minutes is that actually?
That is longer than a PvP game. 900 seconds is 15 minutes, right? So you get one use, and then it's gone.
Nice.
Right? That's good. I'll tell you what, though. Speaking of cooldowns, there is something that I want to talk about, and it is about elite skills, right? And this is a bit of a general topic, but I think we've got a few specific examples, shall we say? And the two of those are Tornado and Lich Form. I think both are arguably equally as oppressive, to be honest. They are these incredible power moves that you activate, and you can really put some hurt on your opponents with both of those abilities.
There is nothing more satisfying than being killed by a Lich Form, and you think, oh damn, I was outskilled there, wasn't I? Oh, he popped the Lich.
And so obviously these abilities in general are very, very powerful. You know, you could argue that's fair enough. They're elite skills. You can't, and there is a certain level of counterplay. Like Lich, I think arguably has a little bit more counterplay than Tornado. Like Tornado is unblockable, eternal CC. Lich Form, you can attack the Lich, you can pressure the Lich, right? They are actually vulnerable while they're in Lich Form. The auto attacks can be destroyed by projectile destruction there as well, so you can counterplay that. But sometimes, man, those auto attacks, they get you, right? And look, this is not like a learn to play issue, guys. You see this in very high level games, right? We saw this in Motor. We see this in monthly ATs. Sometimes, man, that Lich, it gets the 1/1/1 trait on you, and oh my goodness, right? It is, it's quite unfortunate. So
but looking at high level games in particular, there, it's more about using the Lich correctly to make sure you're getting that value. Like you're watching the fight to make sure that the big cooldowns that are going to punish you are not available anymore, and then you're going to press the Lich, because in that more organized environment, like we are going to have the Tempest with Swirling Winds. You are going to have maybe the Thief that's able to jump on, strip the stability, and then get on the CC train on the Lich. Obviously, like these lines of play are a little bit more difficult for solo queue, and sometimes you have to use those cooldowns for the rest of the fight. But that's where like the player skill of the player actually using the Lich comes in, or even Rampage back in the day, and Tornado to a lesser extent, I would say, because I mean Tornado mostly you're just watching for stability, but making sure you find the right time to use the Lich is it's a decision that has to be made, and it's not necessarily a difficult decision. But if you watch someone walk into a fight and press Lich Form and then get punished for it, like there's opportunities to play poorly, and I think you see it a lot more frequently in, say, ranked. But then there's also, it's less likely for players in ranked to capitalize on the mistake there. So I think there's room to like adjust downward in cases like this, but it's also the case that making the counterplay options either more visible or more available is pretty important, I think, because even, I mean, I reminisce about the past too often, and even on this stream, way too often. But back in the day, Lich Form, you got Fire and Air Sigils getting scaled by Lich Form, which increased your power. You had Spinal Shivers proc. It was like insanely more powerful than it is today, and it generally wasn't a huge problem because you had a lot of counterplay options, and the stronger players were counterplaying the Lich effectively. So it's not to say that Lich can't come down, but I think that giving players better opportunities to counterplay Lich is maybe a more interesting direction.
Okay. I think the underlying thing here though is that I'm not a big fan of having these kind of I win buttons to a certain extent. Like even if you do only I win after, right, after cooldowns have been used, I think it's not particularly. It's not, and I think Lich is less guilty of this, to be honest. Like you can line of sight the Lich, right? Like you know, there are ways you can survive a Lich one, right? More so than Tornado, but like it doesn't half feel bad, man. Like when like the Lich one comes out, it's like, oh well, I'm dead, right? You know, that's it, it's over, right? And you know, to a certain extent, I guess you do get that with other abilities too, right? You know, like there is that, right? That you know, there are some situations where you are just a little bit, you know, well, I can't really survive anymore. But on the other hand, I don't know. I have to state my bias here. I don't particularly like these, you know, relatively long cooldown abilities that just completely transform you into a kind of a juggernaut of death. Like I was never a big fan of Rampage, and I kind of got bullied by that when that was doing damage as well. You know, I love those. I love that rock crit that flies round the corner and gets you, right? That was always a fun experience to have.
9K rock.
Yep, the rock, the boulder getting you good there. So I think Rampage is in a, you know, kind of a, you know, it's in an okay spot right now in terms of its balance as a result of that. Yeah. So I think that, you know, Lich Form and in particular Tornado, I think, you know, I'll allow Lich Form existing because look, I know Necromains, guys. Okay, like they're a close second, okay, compared to Ellie mains actually. When it comes to you know, defending the green class, I mean, look, I respect it, guys. Okay, I'm not going to give you a hard time for that. That's fine, right? But you know, in general, I don't really like the elite, the elite skill, as in like, oh yeah, it's my ultimate ability. I prefer something that's a little bit more like Jaunt in a way, right? Like this ability that kind of enables a build or enables a playstyle in a way, but it isn't just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna jaunt on you and kill you instantly, right? That's not really how it works. It's just like it's just a very powerful, unique skill, right? That can be build defining or player defining without just being this complete juggernaut whirlwind of death, right? That means like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have a fun time here.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the direction of elite skills has changed a bit since launch. Like launch was very much about the Lich Form and the Tornado and the Rampage, but looking at most of the elite skills that are on elite specs, they are kind of pushed a little bit further down toward more of a fourth utility, if you will, and obviously a bit more powerful than a utility skill, but slightly longer cooldown, not extreme cooldown, not a immediately crush this fight type of thing. But I think there's room for both of those. Like,
yeah, for sure.
I think there's room for Lich to exist, and there's room for Rampage to exist, and I think
maybe
there are
just make the
numbers
projectile
these things play pretty well at, and not necessarily that they're at that right now. Like Rampage and Tornado, I think defend themselves a little bit too effectively, and like the Rampage damage is pretty far down now because a lot of the skills are on CCs.
Rampage feels fair, honestly.
Rampage getting that damage reduction and getting that like difficulty to really lock it down was more of an issue when all the skills did damage, and then Tornado kind of being, I'm going to constantly CC you, so it's harder to counter pressure that. Whereas Lich stands as kind of the most fair of the transforms. Yeah. Maybe it does the most damage now, but it's still not particularly unfair. And shout out to Naru in the chat who called out Lich being, you know, pretty counterplayable.
Yeah, it certainly is the one that you have the most opportunity to really do something. I think Tornado really stands out as one that, you know, to be honest, like Tornado might be in kind of a need of a slight rework, to be honest. Like maybe you can kind of adjust the way it CCs, but
I don't know how the hell you're going to do that, to be honest. Like,
I mean, it's either going to be 300-second cooldown, 600-second cooldown, or it's going to need some kind of mechanical rework. I think it's a difficult one to deal with there as well. Dude, look at Floody trying to get his own class nerfed here. Like the true martyr for Guild Wars 2 balance here. Always advocating for the Hollowsmith nerfs. But yeah, and it's unblockable as well. That is quite the bonus meme on Tornado as well. That's a good thing.
Honestly, and Tornado being blockable would pretty much solve every issue immediately, I feel. You know, most classes have access to blocks, and Yeah, no, I don't know. Like, if you put Swirling Winds down, that would eliminate a lot of pressure from it as well. So, not the worst change ever.
I suppose so. I mean, I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical on that one, to be honest. I don't know. But so for another thing there as well, and this is going to be a bit of a topic switch up, but we are kind of moving about here a little bit. Let's talk about core classes, because there are certain classes that are very difficult to balance because it's hard to nerf the elite specialization without nerfing the core class as well. Like in particular, I think Ellie probably stands out here as like the class that is like, oh my goodness.
I would
right?
actually say core NG.
Yeah, NG also suffers from this a lot, right? Like
nades,
NG and Ellie
like,
really suffer.
Nades, and core NG suffers.
Exactly, right? Yeah. Almost everything you do causes a lot of to address Hollowsmith or to address Scrapper if that becomes very oppressive, which maybe it might do become very, very powerful. It would also affect these core classes here, and the approach we saw with Rev I think is very interesting actually. That you add this additional mechanic, and this is slightly outside the scope here, but we can kind of go around the edges here a little bit and have a general discussion about this philosophy and about this design. Is that essentially a drawback was retroactively fitted to Herald, right? That you gain your facet of nature, but you lose this this ability, Ancient Echo, right? Like that, which gives you energy and generates a unique effect. And as a result of that, right, a lot of people kind of scoffed at it a little bit. But I'll tell you what, guys, French worms. They were on those core revs, okay? They were on those core revs, going crazy on that dueling spec. And perhaps, I'm going to say, actually, like, if we do see a nerf to Condi Rev to the point where it isn't really what it was, you know what gives you extra resistance, guys? Malik's Ancient Echo, okay? Boom. Easy resistance uptime there on the core rev. Could it be the French worm's time to shine on this incredible build? But yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about this. So, is it potentially within the realm of possibility, or do you think it's a good idea, CMC, to say maybe give an F5, right, to core Ellie, right? And I can really stress those fingers there to get the high APM.
Does anyone actually have skills bound to F5? I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Like
I used to, and then I realized it was a massive mistake.
I mean, on the topic of like adding something to be removed by elite specs, I don't really have strong feelings one way or the other. Like, I think the biggest value that we've seen in enabling core specs is kind of giving like cross traitline synergies that enable something more powerful, such that you can't take both of those and an elite spec and say the most valuable core traitline. Like, you look at historically back when people played core DPS card more often, it was you need Radiance to get the crit chance, but then you also need Virtues to get more retaliation to enable that crit chance, and then you're always taking, what is it, Honor or Valor? It's Valor. I always get the two mixed up, but the Meditation trait line, you're always taking the Meditation trait line. And so you actually can't play DH on that build because you need 3 core trait lines, and I think like that has generally been a pretty interesting way to do it. We could also go with like the F5 or the other add on top of something. I don't really have strong feelings one way or the other as to which is better. I think it is valuable to make core specs playable. Like it would be great to see every core spec have a viable build in addition to every elite spec having a viable build. But it's a bit more of a complicated problem, and it's very, very difficult to do entirely with splits, I think. So,
yeah. I think that is one thing that is perhaps better tackled, in collaboration with the rest of the skills team, right? Because sometimes you do need to have a mechanical rework, because if you nerf something in a lot of these core classes, it will just end up, in for an elite spec, right? Outside of that elite specialization trait line, you kind of end up just nerfing the base class as well, which can be a little bit unfortunate. Like, one alternative there is to kind of, go ahead, Angeels. Yeah.
I think we're only going to see that stuff with the specialization reworks, realistically. I think it's going to take one of those. Like for core NG, it's probably going to require something relating to firearms or maybe even tools again to some of the traits that are now underperforming since the balance splits that occurred in the February patch. For really some of these, the spec to really gain either some some more sustain, or just the ability to completely change up the role as well completely. So I think it is going to require those complete reworks in order for this to happen, as opposed to just splits. Because I don't know what you could change as a split to make core NG viable in comparison to Hollow or something. Because on the top of my head, it just doesn't seem that way at all.
Oh, I think one of the problems with NG is that it is a little bit limited in its weapon choices, shall we say.
I would actually go the other way and say it's actually the fact that each of the trait lines is incredibly valuable from a just pure utility sense in terms of buffing the elite specializations. If you consider other trait lines in other classes, they don't benefit as much from cross trait line compatible, like what's the word? Not compatibility. Synergy. That's the one. Yeah. Synergy. But engineer really does. You think alchemy, boom, instantly all these boons that benefit my elite spec. Okay, explosives. Similar play style. In terms of outputting damage, but it benefits my elite spec. So that's the difficulty that the balance team is probably going to find when they go to rework some of these specs, going into buffing them, like buffing core specs in collaboration with the elite specs. If that makes sense.
Yeah, you don't want to make the problem worse than it already is.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. That's what it comes down to.
So I'm sure there'll be a little bit of oversight there. Make sure nothing too broken. Just manage to slip through the net, as it were, there with PvP balancing, and still give some exciting opportunities for the other game modes as well. Because you have to bear that in mind, guys. Right? I know that a lot of you guys are probably really into PvP or World vs. World, and don't worry, by the way, we are going to be talking about World versus World because my goodness. Okay, some exciting developments have happened in World versus World very, very recently, which is definitely
worth it. It all came in a hotfix.
Yeah, in a hotfix, by the way, guys. Okay, the biggest change to World versus World in years was in a hotfix. Okay, that's a true story right there. More on that later. But yeah, that's you've got to be careful, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, right? Like raids are a consideration, like even open world is a consideration. PvP World versus World, all these things kind of have to coexist and have some have a little bit of shared territory when it comes down to the balance stuff there as well. So that's something that the skills team really has to be careful with. It's no easy task to do that whatsoever when it comes down to that as well. There's actually there's one thing that we kind of forgot to talk about with Warrior, actually, and this kind of segues into the next topic that I want to talk about, and that is the topic of support classes and the support role.
Heal Breaker
in PvP, yeah. So yeah, Heal Breaker is actually a thing right now in ranked, and it is not. It is not a meme, my friends. Okay, it absolutely isn't. But when it comes down to competitive play, I think support is in a bit of an odd spot almost, because Firebrand does still exist, right? You can definitely play that, perhaps not quite as effectively as the Tempest, right? Tempest is seeing play kind of across the board right now in a lot of these high-level teams, 55, Ultranum, Team USA, and so on, right? Like they're all going with the Tempest approach. And there are a few other builds that kind of are spinning around, like talking about Heal Breaker, Core Guardian as well, by the way, guys. Like, don't sleep on Core Guard. Like, surprisingly not bad, actually. Yeah. On that support build there as well. But I imagine diversity is certainly the goal here for these builds here. But I think what kind of has caused a bit of a few issues with Firebrand is that it's in a bit of a weird spot right now. It's very much a hybrid spec, and that's kind of bit it in the ass a little bit right now, because in order to enable itself being a more it does a bit of damage, it debuffs, right? Applies vulnerability and all that stuff, and tries to heal at the same time. It doesn't really have like the muscle to really survive quite well in a lot of these fights, and can't really disengage quite well enough there, and ends up getting picked off very early there. So like when it comes to like hybrid support specs, which you could argue that Heal Breaker kind of falls into, is that something that is a concern from a balance perspective, or are we going to see maybe the balanced design is going to go towards more dedicated supports, right? So stuff like that is more like Core Guardian that doesn't really do a lot of damage. It is just, okay, right, we're going to support the team and see if we can carry them. Like the same with Tempest. You know, Tempest is a pretty, has a little bit of damage, of course, but it is more of a dedicated support, like more so than the Firebrand.
I think there's room for both to exist, and they're going to kind of enable different comps. You're definitely going to want that more pure support character if I'm running with something like Necro. I just want as great of a support character as I can have to enable my DPS. And I mean, on the topic of Firebrand, I think that support Firebrand kind of got maybe hit a little bit harder for the purposes of hitting the side noting potential of Firebrand. More of the symbol brand kind of forced our hand to touch some of the things that kind of made support Firebrand a more viable option. And like, it kind of sucks, but it was kind of how it had to be at the time. And I think we're always going to want to reevaluate if there's a way that we can more effectively bring down something like Symbol Brand to make Firebrand back to its kind of support roots. Because I think it was very much what's supposed to be more of a pure support character. And so crushing the F2 kit and reducing the effectiveness kind of across the board, maybe it makes it kind of forced into more of that hybrid role, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is not necessarily the... I mean, it makes it so that Tempest is kind of like the supreme team fight support character, because it is just... that is very much his purpose. That is very much... There's not anything else that we've had to touch it for any other reason, so it's kind of at its full potential, where something like Support Firebrand is not at its full potential because it also enables things like Symbol Brand to exist. But I think it's nice to have both of those different options, and maybe Firebrand is supposed to be the pure support character, but so something like Warrior Support, I have not seen this build at all, and so I don't know what is this nonsense? Like, Tactics Spellbreaker with like shouts or something?
Yeah, shouts and War Banner.
Yeah, War Banner. War Banner is actually a fun ability too, right? Because you have it can stomp people, right? If you land it on them, and it can also revive your allies. I think that's such a cool ability. I'm not gonna lie, that is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
War Banner in 2v2, I think was.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many people were playing it, but
it was actually really good in 2v2. It was like super strong in the 2v2 actually. Like there were a lot of pretty highly rated teams that were playing with the Heel Breaker, the warrior there as well. It was definitely a cool build that is seeing a little bit of experimentation. I don't think it would take I think it's not there yet. Okay, if you train it down, it does struggle, right? It has a bit of a rough time, but you know, maybe a few patches down the line, it's gonna get there. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, right? Like kind of a lot of the Firebrand nerfs came through to disable some of the like somewhat degenerate builds that were starting to form there. That it was a bit of an all-in-one kit, right? That it had, which was a bit of a problem. And I think we do still kind of see that, and we see this infect the 1v1 side node of Guardian build as well. And I think a really big problem is, look, I'm sorry, Guardian mains, look, I play a lot of Firebrand, so I'm allowed to say this, guys, but Rid of Persistence is an absolutely disgusting trait in PvP. My goodness.
I'll be honest, it goes further than that. It's just a symbol-orientated gameplay.
Yeah, it's so dirty, man. It really is.
Rid of Persistence has kind of been in the same place since, 2014? When was that patch again? 2016? I don't remember. The pre-hot patch, the specialization rework. I don't remember. My time is all messed up. But, I mean, it's definitely fair to say that, like, creating 240 radius in a game mode that is very 240 radius centric on cooldowns that are like 6 seconds, 8 seconds, creates maybe a bit more pressure than we'd like. And I mean, so throw it out there. People probably overreact, but keep in mind this is not like set in stone or anything. This is not guaranteed to happen in the future. This is not absolutely going to happen.
Here it comes.
So calm down. But like, Rid of Persistence radius increase is the type of thing that we would look at for a potential functional split, because it is like this format warping effect. It is the 10 target scourge. It is just fundamentally changing like how the game mode plays, because suddenly these really small cooldowns that last pretty high uptime are just completely unavoidable while standing on the point, which is such a major function of how Conquest plays, that it is something that, I mean, I've thought about it a lot. It's a conversation I want to have more with the skills team. It's like, is this something that actually makes sense to remove game-wide? Maybe it is, because like the impact on PvE, the impact on WoW is kind of lesser. It's like less important to get that radius increase. But if it doesn't make sense to pull that out game-wide, it is something that we could look at for a functional split. And that would really open the door to kind of reevaluate kind of all the things about Guardian, because it's very much kind of revolved around this trait for so long. All of the symbol builds, core symbol build, symbol DH back in HA was a thing, symbol brand, like all of these things just revolve around how rate of persistence impacts the game mode, and we've just tried to balance around it for so long that in the case of Firebrand, maybe things have gotten hit we've basically shredded support Firebrand a little bit because of this trait, and it doesn't feel great. It's not necessarily the best result. So there is opportunity to do something crazy here. Maybe there's the opportunity to look at a functional split if it doesn't make sense to remove this functionality, and then go from there, because that opens the door for so many things.
Yeah, for sure. And
keep in mind, no guarantees. Calm down. Like, I saw some Pog use. I saw the clip it posted.
It's already Reddit. You know,
it's too late, man. It's
CMC is confirmed.
Yeah,
Red of
I
persistence.
knew that was going to happen. Like,
Guardian dead class. Blue class dead. It's beautiful.
I think it's worth saying, because I mean, this is a lot of feedback that is seen. There's a lot of comments that I see. I mean, this is my own personal experience with this trait for 4 or 5 years.
It's not a fun trait to play against, to be honest. Like,
just
the fact that you can't do anything about it. You know, we were talking earlier about making high impact skills that you want to avoid and dodge, but rid of persistence comboed with any symbol is just not that. You know, you just have to. You
got to dodge every second, right? You know. That's,
you run node. You're just like, okay, I'm out of here. You know, I'm not engaging that. So
definitely on the table.
It's on the table. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where we're going.
And potential, you know, if you address that trait, you end up, you know, with the option to then take some of that power and add that back into the support Firebrand kit, right? The Firebrand kit in general, from the support side as well. So it's not like it would just be, oh yeah, we're just going to nerf Firebrand, right? Like, we're going to kick them while they're down a little bit. So, you know, you can, there would still be, you know, alternatives there. And, you know, potentially, again, you know, definitely not confirmed here on this end. Like, rid of persistence could be a trait that, you know, maybe even would end up, you know, looking at a rework there as well. Like, sometimes reworks can happen, right? We saw this with the Wells trait, which was being lamented in chat earlier on today. You know, poor old what we have, Vampiric Rituals, which, by the way, guys, was a very cool icon there. You had like the candles of the bats flying around, but Blood Bank is a cool trait, actually. Not the strongest trait in the world, but it is a fun one, right? It's a cool piece of design there. You know, to be sure there. But yeah, you know, there you go, guys. That's all confirmed. Make sure you clip that and ship it. Wells and PvP offer much different gameplay. Well, I mean, I'm not sure I'd entirely agree with that. I'm not sure if I really want triple Well Reapers running around, particularly with the new Well of Darkness. Not the biggest fan of that.
That's not engaging. It's not that different to symbols, really, because you have to just stay out of them.
The difference is, and I think it's worth bringing it up, like something like Well of Suffering or Well of Darkness. Like, the cooldown is much longer and the duration is.
Yeah, of course.
Uptime of that skill is so much lower than any of the symbols. So it's like having those skills that pressure the node are valuable. They just can't be 100% of the time.
Yes,
like, putting my Well of Suffering to push the guard off, push the bunker off node, or to just create that pressure is fine, because you can also just walk out of it, and then it's a long cooldown that you're getting punished for spending.
Yeah, so, you know, Wells have their place, and then they still have a fair bit of power, because, you know they did lose their trait, but, you know, on the other hand, you know, they did have their cooldowns kind of reduced there as a bonus meme as well, to kind of almost get the trait for free. And when Well of Darkness, my goodness, what an ability that is right now.
Yeah.
As well, it is quite a strong one there. Lots of damage and some fun conditions to enjoy there as well. But, you know, like, all these things, guys, like, variety is the spice of life. as it were. So it's always good to see, different abilities and different approach there. And I think that is a fair point there as well. When it comes to stuff like the wells, I think abilities like Well of Corruption in particular on something like Necromancer, I think that abilities like that do have a place, particularly on a class like Necromancer, which is very orientated about the team fight, and like particularly on Necro as well. I think wells can work, right, because they do force you to give up one of your very powerful utilities. Like Necromancer right now, particularly in the current meta, is very much defined by its utility skills, right? Like stuff like Spectral Walk, Fleshworm, and the Fear Wall. So you do actually have like a significant decision to make, like if you want to take one of these abilities, and that kind of trade-off is very, very healthy for the game. There's less of an issue there than with some of the other AoE spam within the game. Like Area of Effect has its place within Guild Wars 2, like within PvP. So it's not the end of the world. A bit of a smile there from Angeels. He's enjoying it. I mean, look, that's got to be the best part of being a balanced dev, right? CMC, that you get to see the salt, right? Like the anger, right? When stuff gets nerfed, like look at him. It's slightly pixelated, but look at that mischievous smile there. I mean, it is a good time there indeed. Let's see. Did we actually do we miss any classes when it comes to PvP? By the way, I think we kind of.
So, but we didn't talk about runes and amulets.
Oh yeah,
which you did mention.
Yeah, runes and amulets. I mean, we did touch on it a little bit with like the Berserker thing, for sure.
Well,
like
I mean, I only have one thing to really say, and that's delete speed rune.
Speed rune. Ooh.
Speed rune. Yeah, speed rune needs to go.
Yeah, speed rune is an interesting one, right? Like because it has such a powerful effect for a rune. And to be honest, right, I'm gonna be a slight speed rune white knight here. I think having runes that have this very powerful and unique effect. It's not do more damage, right? Oh, I go a little bit faster, right? Yeah, I think that's a really cool design to have these really impactful runes that will, potentially even enable a build, right? Trapper rune is actually another good example of this, in my opinion. I think it's such an impactful effect, and it really defines the build, like a Trapper DH or a Trapper Druid. I think Trapper Ranger.
I think Trapper rune's pretty cool. Like, I think it's a cool effect.
Yeah. I think it's not too bad to have a rune like that. But I think I would agree with you with speed runes maybe being a little bit overtuned there as well. Like when you've got these zoomers right going around all over the place, it can be quite extreme.
Necro.
Yeah.
Impossible to catch.
Slow
and cumbersome class, by the way.
But I think in particular, like I'm curious what you think about this CMC. Like some classes really almost like are forced into certain rune choices because they need a particular thing. I think the thing that really comes to mind is Guardian with a movement speed rune of some kind, right? Like or Necromancer is the same. Like it's
I would also say
always going to be
engineer with some sort of condition removal rune. Like it's been leadership, resistance, revenant. A lot of these classes, they have to take a rune because they're lacking something innately that limits them. And you could argue it's a good thing, but I don't think that's... I think that takes a little bit of something away. I won't lie.
I think I'll let before I comment on that. I think I definitely want to bring CMC in here, like for his thoughts over those the initial rune discussion there before we get down into that.
Yeah, I mean the point of like using a rune to fill a gap in a spec or a build. I mean it's kind of a value that runes provide. Like I think more of the problem is maybe that not all classes feel compelled to have like such a glaring hole, but at the same time I think it would be potentially better if more classes had those holes, not necessarily because they would all be forced to take specific runes, but looking at something like NG, which wants more Condi removal from their rune set, or looking at something like Necro or Guardian, which wants more mobility for their move set. I don't think that's necessarily a problem, and because you can still... I mean, it's not 100% that you need that, right? You can play Guardian without Lynx rune, or you can play without... What are people still playing Lynx as a meta?
Yeah, it's Lynx Traveler are the choices that you see a lot.
I mean, you can run without those if you want. If you want more damage, you can play without those, and it's just kind of the case that you don't want to. And maybe that's because you can't. I see a comment in chat. You just actually can't. And it kind of sucks, but then the rune is there to, I guess, mitigate that, to make it feel less bad. I'm not saying it doesn't feel good, right? Like, it doesn't feel great that I feel compelled to take this option, but it at least fixes a problem that you would otherwise have.
For sure, yeah. I don't think it's like an intrinsic, this is an objectively bad thing that should be adjusted. But I think it just kind of limit the scope of what you can do unless you take this. I almost feel like it should be the other way around, if that makes any sense, right? You should take the rune to enable a certain playstyle, right? Like, not you need the rune to enable your playstyle. If
I'd agree with that.
Sense,
I'd
right?
agree
Like,
with that, yeah.
I think it's a subtle distinction, but there is a distinction there, which is why I think maybe
Sorry. I mean, a rune bonus is basically a trait, right? It's your 6 bonus is an extra trait, but it's a generic trait. So I think it's more difficult to try to make that build-defining trait on the rune side, as opposed to doing something more interesting in your trait system to push a more diverse or a more exciting playstyle. Because runes have to be generic, we can't make it ideal for, like, I mean, it's going to be very difficult to enable a build specifically from a rune.
No. Well,
and I mean, I'd rather not even see it on that. Like, it
Sure.
should be more like a utility value coming from the rune, and then your traits are your big build-defining choices. At least that's my opinion. I'm sure some feel differently. Like, more interesting decisions is always better, yes, but whether or not it makes sense to put those on the rune, maybe not.
I would argue that there is a little bit of that, though. I think we talked about the Trapper rune. Like, in a way, the Trapper rune is pretty build defining, like, particularly on, like, the Soul Beast, I would say, right? With very, very short trap cooldowns, you can just, like, it can run. It's a bit of a menace as well in ranked, actually, like that build. Like, it's a bit of a sleeper build, dude. Like, a lot of people, they do not see the traps, and then they stand in the traps, Angels, and they stay there, and then they die. Which is quite funny, but I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe it's not the best for balance. I think certainly from your perspective, CMC, I definitely understand that, right? Because it can, if you have these runes that are super almost like tailored for a specific build or like a few specific builds, it can maybe enable some gameplay that is potentially not great, to deal with there. But I don't know. Maybe I'm biased, but I find that kind of exciting, right? I kind of like it. They're like, oh yeah, like you take the traps, and you take the Trapper rune. Whoa, incredible! Now we get stealth and super speed on every single one of our traps. Like, oh, it's a bit of a fun one, and I think I'd be tempted to say I want more of that rather than less.
Yeah, I think so. I like that. I like that kind of gameplay that comes about. It's almost like cheesing in a way, but not, if that makes sense.
I mean, as soon as you start trying to make runes that more build-defining choice, it kind of restricts the choices that you're going to make. If I'm playing the trap build, I always want to take Rune of the Trapper. I'm not considering, do I want more damage? Do I want a little bit more survivability? Do I want a little bit more Condi cleanse or a little bit more mobility? Like, I'm not saying it's incorrect, but it comes back to, it very much clashes with rune diversity if you are making runes that enable a specific build, because it's always going to be the optimal choice there.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair point, and it would also limit design space as well. Like, potentially, if you're going to add a new elite specialization that also had traps, right? You'd have to go like, okay, hang on, we need to consider this rune in this context as well. That might also be causing additional problems. So there's definitely pros and cons. There's no easy answer to a question like that.
There's not even a right answer.
Yeah, for sure.
There's arguments for both sides. There's value in doing it both ways, and that kind of ends up being what runes are, is that there are some cases where you have the Trapper rune, and there are some cases where you have the more generic option. And I think there are definitely improvements that could be made to the rune system, but it's probably also not the highest priority.
Yeah. I think one thing that we could very briefly touch on is stuff like the 10% health modifier runes in particular, because it turns out that's a very, very powerful effect on some of these here. It kind of enables you to play incredibly aggressive, like play a very, very aggressive build and still gain a good amount of durability from stuff like that, like particularly Divinity Rune, because Divinity Rune even gives you more damage, right? It gives you more power, more ferocity, more precision, more condition damage if that's what you want as well. And also it will beef you up a fair bit as well. So a lot of these generic effects, like, end up feeling like, I mean, look, Divinity is like the ultimate generic rune. It just gives you all stats and then 10% health after that, which is, you know, maybe not the most exciting, rune in the universe there. And I don't know, like it almost feels like some of like the toolkit of these of like the 6 bonuses, like the bonus 6 bonuses, like 25% movement speed and plus 10% health. It feels maybe a little bit too generic in a way, like and applicable to too many builds. Potentially that maybe we could do with some slightly more unique effects on a lot of these runes, like unique bonuses, instead of having these like super generic bonuses on some of these rune sets as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree. Like, it's not exciting, but not every choice needs to be exciting. Like, Divinity's good, and it's boring, but it's good, and like having that effect is, I think, it is a good thing that Divinity exists. And it's not the most exciting rune. It's not the most. I don't know. I mean, it's just a solid. If this is what I want, if I want more damage, like it's about equivalent to like a power, like in terms of the amount of damage you get from a power rune, excluding the 6 bonus on those power runes that are typically damage modifiers. Your approximate EV of damage from the power, precision, ferocity on Divinity is about equal to the power that you get from the 3 bonuses on a power rune. So it is like kind of that mid-range, hybrid-y, I want some damage, but I also need some survivability. And like 10% health, I think, is useful because of like the discrepancy in health pools across classes. Like it's nice on Ellie or it's nice on Thief or Guardian to be able to get a little bit of health. And obviously those classes are more designed around having a lower health pool, but you can always take Vitality as a stat, so taking Divinity as a rune to essentially give myself a little bit extra Vitality in lieu of taking something else, losing a little bit of damage or mobility or utility from my other rune sets. I think it's a fine option. It's not the most exciting, but it serves its purpose.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's fair. That's a fair statement. You know, there's certainly a place for that sort of thing. And, you know, as you say, it doesn't have to be a complete roller coaster, you know, what direction you go with on every single decision you have to make. So I think that's okay. For the rune stuff there for Guild Wars 2. There's one more thing, and I'm not sure how if we can really go too much on this topic actually.
Okay.
And it is combos and combo fields. There, and this is more of a design thing, so like we might not get particularly far on this topic, and we can kind of move on to world versus world after this, I think.
Probably.
But yeah, I mean, well, actually, you know what? I'll just completely. I'll just say that
combos are dead.
You could I'm just gonna let CMC say what you can say, and if you have an opinion on this, like, what do you think of combo finishes, that combo system, combo interaction, in just competitive, or not even competitive, right? Well, obviously it will be competitive, just in Guild Wars 2, or like, what are your thoughts on the combo system? And you know, do you see, you know, that having a place in the game as it moves forward, and do you like that system or not?
Yeah, I mean, some combos are obviously a lot better than others. Like, historically, we've seen most of the value coming from blasting fire fields for might, blasting water fields for healing, blasting smoke fields for stealth, like leaping through smoke fields. Some of the combo system feels good to use, and then some of the combo system feels worse. Like projectile finisher well, it's certainly there. I think it's interesting to have that dynamic, and then it's just like, some of it is better than others. Other parts. I can't really speak too much to like the combo system in general, because obviously we're not going to split the combo system. Like projectile finisher now does twice as much burning or something. Like that's not really the direction that makes sense. So I won't really go too deep. But I like the combo system. When it's good, it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be inclined to agree with that. I think it is just another layer of mechanics, right? That a player can really abuse if they have.
I just feel it's been forgotten. You know, a lot of the, you know, back in core, it was a lot more reliant on, even in HOT. But you know, the Druid Scrapper matchup in HOT, you had to use that light field combo finish to get light aura to get retail to win that, because that's how you countered it. But you just don't really see that much gameplay with that anymore. You know, you see, well, I mean, do you really see it at all? I'm trying to think. No. Scrapper, yeah, sure, but that's kind of it. So, it's I feel that it should be brought back a bit because it is a very skill defining element to a build.
Yeah, and I think that was something that I was a little bit sad to see that in the previous patch, a fair few interactions with traits and runes, were actually removed with the combo interactions, which is a little unfortunate, I think, to see that removed there. And I'd like to see a bit of a reversal on that. I do think it is a fun system. And I think in PvP is where it can kind of shine the most, really. It's a little bit difficult to get value out of it these days in World versus World and PvE. World versus World, of course, it used to be very much combo focused back in the core days, right? You gotta yell for big water, boys, okay? You gotta yell for those big water fields.
That was high energy.
Yeah, that is high energy. High energy indeed, right? It really is.
Water field has kind of suffered over the years of more distinct support characters exist. Like before Tempest existed, it was so important for blasting Waterfield was like the big heal. It wasn't, oh, I'm just going to cast Wash the Pain Away or Overload Water, right? Or Firebrand, as healing is a bit lower now. But we didn't really have those pure healers, so it was a lot more necessary to get value from the combo system. And it's kind of relatively fallen off compared to those options, which is why it's still valuable. Like if there's a water field underneath you, you're probably going to blast it to get value, but it's not like the core sustain big heal gameplay anymore. That's been pushed into more of like Druid and Tempest and Firebrand to some extent. Maybe a little bit of Scourge in terms of like barrier. The support characters are a lot more well developed than they were in core, so the combo system is just less important in that sense, for sure.
And again, this is where we can't really talk too much in this area, but I think that's potentially something where the reworks and different approaches to skill balancing and trait balancing, right? These combo finishes are perhaps potentially a little bit weak compared to the other options there, but there are ways you can rectify that in traits, right? You can have traits that interact with combo finishes to make them very, very powerful and more powerful. And potentially something that you really want to go for. I think one interaction that actually really stands out here is actually one that I think does probably see a lot of play. Like you'll probably see people actively going for this is Frost Aura on blasting an ice field on a Tempest, right? Because that will then give boons if you have various aura traits, right, that interact with the aura to give boons about the place there. It also heals because of the elemental bastion there as well. I think that kind of interaction is... it's a subtle one, right? But I think it's a powerful one that you'll definitely want to play around. You can, on a Tempest, you can leap through a fire field, right? You'll share a fire aura for a similar effect there. Like that kind of natural synergy, I think is super cool, super interesting, actually a really fun bit of gameplay that it's a lot of fun to play around, and it's a very kind of skill-defined thing that it really does require a lot of thought to go into the gameplay there, and that's something that personally I would like to see come back a little bit there for Guild Wars 2 there. But like I said, we can't really say too much on that, guys. This is strictly just a kind of a competitive balance overview. We can't really say too much on systems and actual mechanical design right here. So with that, okay, it's the moment you guys have all been waiting for, okay?
No, I don't think any of them. World v World, who plays that?
Yeah. Guys, let's talk a little bit about World versus World. Seriously, chat, okay? Behold on screen in the top right-hand corner, the savior of World versus World, the slayer of Scourge, okay? The slayer and the salvation for Reaper, okay?
In a
it is
hot
CN6.
Most of the feedback I've heard is that people are still trying stuff out, which is more exciting, obviously, but it has not been determined that Scourge is like dead.
Scourge is not dead, absolutely. No, it's not dead whatsoever.
Which
is
good. That's ideal.
It has actually enabled all three specializations in Necro, actually. Like, Core Necro is seeing play, Reaper is seeing play, and Scourge is seeing play still. And look, perfect, right? We did it. Now you can have multiple different play styles, right? We're seeing a lot of these kind of old school melee comp, right? Like where you play a lot of Reapers, you kind of push in deep and start going, and man, it feels so good to play Reaper. It really does. It's such a fantastic
It feels
spec
good
to play.
to
right?
push. Like,
Yeah.
let's be quite real here, okay? Like, it feels good to be able to push and not just sit AFK at range for half the fight. So, you know, it's the classic World v World gameplay, actually pushing and fighting, right?
Yeah, it's really, really good. It's a fantastic time, and that single change it has absolutely massively improved World versus World, just from a gameplay perspective, right? Like the Scourge, it was very, very oppressive, and it was kind of, I mean, it was the Scourge of World versus World for quite a while, and it's awesome to see that. So just for some, just to kind of clarify there, guys. So what we saw was a massive nerf to the target cap of Scourge. Shades went down from 5 targets down to 2, right? Even with Big Shade, and that kind of shoved Big Shade out of existence as well, to be honest. But, you know, they did get the shade around them in exchange for that. But this was probably one of the most significant... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
If you're in melee range, you still get 2+2. Or you get full shades out. So it's a little bit reduced effectiveness still in melee range. And we thought about whether it should be 3 or whether it should be 2, given that you're going to have the self-shade. And, I mean, just based off, like, kind of how oppressive Scourge has been, we leaned a little bit harder, went with the 2, so you get 2+2. And then obviously it's better because at range you can only hit 2. I think it feels a lot better in that sense, instead of being able to pressure 5 people from long distance with the shade skills. So you really need to get into that melee range to get full value now, which I think ends up playing a bit better. To me, it sounds like people are still trying a lot of stuff, and it's possible Scourge still might be best in slot. But I mean, this kind of goes back to what we talked earlier, where we want it to be at least close enough that the players can try things, and maybe you guys are going to play it for
all
a month or play for 2 months, and then figure out, oh, Scourge is still the best. We're just going to go back to Scourge, and it's like, okay, well, we can touch Scourge again. Like, there's no there's no reason why additional changes can't happen, and it's great to see that kind of the door has opened at least some amount with that change, which is what we were hoping to see.
It's like you mentioned earlier, you don't want players thinking, why bother, right? Like, you know, why would we even try anything else, right? When Scourge is just going to flatten you if you attempt it. And that's certainly not the case anymore. Like, I think a few players in the chat still think Scourge is on top. And yeah, maybe. You know, it's entirely possible that that's the case. But I haven't found that on EU. Like, and in Tier 1, guys, by the way, right? You know, like a lot of these high-end servers are actually playing Reaper, experimenting with Core Necromancer, and mixing in Scourge there as well with a lot of stuff. And there are still definitely some problems with World versus World balance, and we can talk about that right now. And absolutely, you know, I think in particular, like some outliers are probably Scrapper. Well, the outliers, I'm just going to mention every single meta class right now. Like,
that's kind of how World v World is, though. Like, right in the largest Zergs, you're just going to want the optimal class every time. So even if it's a slight advantage, which I'm not saying it is, like the overperforming classes in World War are probably significantly overperforming relative to their counterparts, but it's still the case that maximizing as many of the best class feels like the general direction of how World War comps are built. And obviously we want it to be closer so you don't feel bad when you're not doing that, but it's not surprising that the main issues with World v World are the classes that are being played the most. That's not really a surprise. But yeah, I mean, we should definitely talk about it.
Yeah.
So, I don't see any issues at all with Altruism or in Scrapper. None whatsoever. So
Altruism ICD is coming on patch day.
That's a kind of a weird
that kind of gameplay was quite interesting. It's quite
obviously, the interaction is unintended. Like, I don't even know why it took so long to fix, but whatever, it's fixed and it'll be live.
Mm-hmm. It is done. And as you say, like when it comes to World versus World, it's going to be difficult to ever find like a really good balance where every single class is going to see play. Because as you say, right, like it's really large scale, so everything scales up incredibly hard, right? Like if one class is really good, you just want loads of them, right? So you can be as much of that powerhouse of a class as you can, right? Now, I think the way that the approach will probably turn out is that you're going to want to have like different play styles, right? Different compositions that kind of require different classes, different specializations to make them work. Because if you try and make every class have parity, there's always going to be one class that's slightly better than another one, so you just want to run that instead. So like you need to kind of enable multiple play styles in World vs. World, like have the melee push, have that, you know, something like the cloud style as well, which can be frustrating, right? But you know, it's a valid way to play the game. Right, as everything is.
No, the Cloud should go.
Wait, you think? You don't think you don't like Cloud?
When a big group does Cloud, it's the most boring and degen thing there is. Pirate ship. Because pirate ship, then Cloud, and then actually engaging and fighting. You know?
Well, I don't know.
Force people to fight, man. Force people to fight.
I think that ultimately these are valid playstyles and they should be enabled.
No, I mean, of course, I'm joking around.
Yeah, okay.
It is a valid playstyle, and obviously for a smaller group versus a larger group, Cloud is the only way you can actually play against this, which I think isn't the greatest. It would be nice for smaller, more organized groups to be able to combat these larger groups like they used to back in core. But obviously, the game is power crept to a state where that's probably just not possible to ever really reach as a balanced state. So, yeah, Cloud's important.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose, like, you know, we've kind of done a bit of a general discussion there, but like one thing I would posit here to CMC is how do you feel about the current power level of classes in PvP, in World vs. World rather? Because World vs. World has the additional complexity of you are playing with PvE gear, right? You have food, you have ascended gear, you can have a few infusions, right? All that sort of shenanigans, right? Like it's a very different environment to the PvP environment. Like personally, I would say the power level could probably come down a fairly significant amount there, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that and where you'd like to see World versus World go on like on a balance level on an individual player.
Yeah, I mean, obviously PvE gear is just going to be, you are just naturally more powerful than in PvP, and so a lot of the damage coefficients that were chosen, a lot of the healing coefficients that were chosen, I don't disagree that it's probably a bit higher than we would like to see. But at the same time, it's unlikely that we're going to maintain 3 distinct values. Like, I'm not going to go and change the damage coefficient of every skill in the game for World v World because of this extra amount of stats. And it's just not, it's not the most sustainable long-term system to have. So there is some sacrifice that is going to be made in terms of, yeah, the numbers are probably going to be a little bit too high in World v World, and hopefully they're not too high. But there's definitely room to split for World v World specifically. Absolutely, like that is a direction we absolutely want to do. But it's not going to be on every skill. I don't think it needs to be on every skill either. Like the stats are a little bit higher, but it obviously blows out the more and more people you have. Like even if it's a couple percent per player across so many players, it's going to be more noticeable. But I think it's possible to balance World v World without splitting every skill, every damage coefficient, every healing coefficient. And that's more of the ideal that we want to push toward. I mean, I guess it's possible that maybe it's just not possible. Like that's not actually true, and we do. I guess there is some world where we do need to split every single number for World v World. It's not off the table. Like, it was a lot of work, but to do, I mean, even the split patch for February, but it's a possibility. I'd just rather not have to do that and have to maintain that, given how, like, PvE gear can change and all the things that kind of impact that outside of things that exist right now. So it's going to be very much of an ongoing chasing our tail for a long time, even if we do try to do that. So I think at this point we're mostly focused on trying to bring down more of the outliers and reevaluating WoW at the current power level. But there is an opportunity to maybe do more of a global bring everything down again.
Yeah, that's something I was going to ask you on. Would you guys consider like just a global like 20% damage reduction straight up? That's applied to you as a buff in World v World.
I mean, that's a fairly trivial thing to do.
I think ESO did that, and whilst it's not like a perfect thing, because obviously you have the roaming and the skirmish group differences and all that, but at the same
that's
time,
the type of thing that we could definitely try out as like a week-long event.
oh yeah, no, I would be really interested to see that. Yeah,
that's a very good idea, actually. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Damage and healing, and I don't know, probably wouldn't touch any of the boons on a basis, but I mean, we could. Like,
but I mean, it would. I mean, that's a straight up number.
You do less damage, you do less healing. There you go.
Yeah.
How does the game actually change? Well, it's not necessarily the correct way to do it. Like, that's not the long-term solution.
No, it's not
like
perfect.
But it's an interesting data point. Like, what actually happens if we do this?
Yeah. I mean,
it's a cool event idea.
Yeah. But also at the same time, maybe allows you guys to target the stronger skills and specific builds, and then apply those kinds of damage reduction values to them, specifically for World v World. No, I would love to see it.
That's the type of thing that we definitely want to do for World v World. Like any of the outliers, it makes sense to bring them back in line, absolutely. But looking at like a blanket across the board damage nerf, I mean, that's the type of thing that we try with an event, and maybe it actually plays really well. And then, okay, the new baseline is you have this 20% nerf on you at all times, and we reevaluate based off that. So, yeah.
It's not a perfect change, but I'd love to see it.
Worth seeing what happens, and worth seeing how terrible it is.
No, you say you think it'd be terrible, but I think it'd be really good.
I just assume that every balance update is terrible, so that's
okay. The Gills 2 Reddit mentality. It's understandable.
No, that's true. The last time, the last time CMC was here, he was like, I was expecting it to be the game. I think you said something like, I was expecting the game to be unplayable, like after the.
I don't know if I said it on stream, but I have said that to a few people. Like, I was really worried about the February update before it shipped, and it actually, obviously there are a lot of problems. We've kind of tried to bring some of those more in line since then, but I was very concerned about the February update when it went out, just because so many things were changing, and everything was based on. It's not like things were just randomly selected, and there was like math and very solid decision making behind a lot of the things. So it's not that it was like, oh, we're just rolling some dice and hoping it works out, but I was really worried, and it ended up being less bad than I worried about, so that was nice. But I mean, at the end of the day, balance is, I say this all the time, balance is not about one patch, it's about continuously improving as we go forward. And I mean, if anytime you ask me if I'm happy about the overall state of balance, I mean, I'll just say no, but that's not because it's bad, it's more because it's not as good as it could be. We can always be better. And that's, I don't know, maybe that's kind of how I feel about a lot of things. This is the CMC life philosophy is just about constantly improving.
Oh.
I wish more people in PvP took that.
Yeah,
attitude,
that is a good attitude to have. Yeah. Instead of blaming the balance, they must overcome the balance, right? That's what needs to happen.
It's like the current state of things is how it is. What are you going to do about it? Like, how are we going to make it better?
Wow.
Because it's never going to be perfect, right?
That is it. That's going to be. Don't let people in ranked here. That's a tough pill to swallow right there. My goodness.
Yeah. Then feel free. Like, I'm not saying that balance is perfect or that every patch is improving the game. Like, that's the goal, that every patch is improving the game. But I'm less worried about. I mean, the state of the game matters for like what needs to be changed, but the state of the game in terms of like, well, this is bad or it's not bad, it doesn't really matter because it can always be better. We just always want to make it better. So there you go.
And well, yeah, absolutely, and that's a fantastic kind of general sentiment there. Yeah. But on the world versus world topic, I think the kind of number one issue that world versus world has suffered from is the nature of application, like particularly the availability of cleanses and conversion mechanics through Scrapper in particular. Like Purity of Purpose is incredibly good here on that there as well, but also kind of like the general boon spam, and as a result of that, the necessity to have this like massive boon removal, boon corruption ability from Necromancers. Now, that has been alleviated a little bit with a lot of these Scourge nerfs. It has significantly reduced the availability of boon corrupts, right? Like you don't have this like massive ranged boon corruption spike, not as much as you used to. You still have that, which is, there's a place for that, but a little bit less so now. How is there? Do you have any ideas or any plans on how you might approach dealing with the kind of mass scaling of incredibly high application of a lot of these boons, a lot of these positive effects that kind of comes with having so many players in one place? Or is that just or is that just a limitation of world versus world, as we were talking about earlier, right? Is that just how it will be because you've got loads of players there, and that's just going to be a nature of the beast thing?
I mean, in some cases, that's how it's going to be. In some cases, it kind of makes sense for that to be how it is. Like, I think stability is a hot topic a lot of the time in World v. World about how much of a necessity it is to kind of like always have stability so that I can push, or always have stability just so I don't get CC chained by 50 people. And whether or not it, like, I mean, stability as a whole, having permanent stability, like in a vacuum looking at stability, if you have permanent stability, that's just broken. Like, it's not necessarily how the game was designed to be played, but at the same time, it's possible that that is what kind of holds World v. World together to some extent, having access to so much stability, so that these large fights can happen. I'm not saying that it can't change, but back in February, we did want to kind of, as we reduced stability in PvP, we wanted to reduce stability a lot in World v. World as well. And there was a lot of concern coming, the feedback before the patch even went out was that there was a lot of concern about how World v. World actually plays with reduced amounts of stability. So we pulled back on a lot of those changes before the update even went out, because the possibility that it just destroys the game mode to not have such high uptime because of the number of players that are attacking you. And so in a vacuum, the mechanic is maybe unhealthy to have such a high uptime, but it's possible that it just enables the better gameplay for the game mode, so it can be correct in that sense. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say it can't come down in one way or another, and all boons corrupts, that type of thing. Like, as you scale up to 50 people, or up to, I mean, whatever number your blob is going to be running with, then a lot of things blow out, and balancing that against keeping those skills relevant enough for small scale to also have the impact is kind of one of the most difficult things about balancing for World v. World is how do we balance for the blob fights and the small scale at the same time? Because the things that blow out when there are 50 people pressing them as opposed to 5 people, 10 people pressing them, it is not an easy problem.
No.
So yeah, there are so many things that you have just talked about that are very abundant given the number of players that have these buttons to press. And I think there's room to there's always room to maneuver, right? There's things that can be reduced, there's things that can be increased. It's a very complicated problem. So I don't have like a philosophy around all of these things need to change, because how that would impact the game mode is kind of more of a question mark as opposed to a known quantity. Like, we made huge sweeping changes to PvP, and a lot of the philosophy was really sound because we could kind of predict and assume based off the number of players that are there how these changes are going to play out. And obviously we're going to overshoot or undershoot, but the core gameplay remains pretty similar, and it still feels about the same. It's just reduced effectiveness, whereas World v. World is a lot more difficult to do that. And so I think a lot of it, for now, we really want to focus on bringing down outliers more than reevaluating the philosophy of maybe blob fights as a whole.
I mean, there's also the question of, does reducing stability access or access to strips and corrupts and CCs in general actually improve the game mode?
And that's another type of thing that we can look at, like an event mode, right? Like, you just have reduced stability duration. I mean, there's very ham-fisted ways to just try things, kind of make sense in that week-long.
Yeah, exactly.
Format. Because we don't want to just shake up stability and then Wovwa is ruined. Like, that's kind of the worst case scenario. Maybe we ruin it for a week, and okay, I mean, that
is fine, that is okay.
I mean, if we turn on an event on like Friday or something and it ruins we probably just turn it off, honestly. Like, we don't want to ruin the game mode for any amount of time, but trying new things, how do you learn anything? You try things. And like, especially in a case where it's much more difficult much more difficult to calculate the end result of any given change, then sometimes you just gotta go back to some trial and error.
No, for sure. And I think, you know, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here, it kind of boils down to the fact that a lot of interactions in world versus world, or rather a lot of interactions that the game has, scale in slightly unfortunate ways. Like, for example, you've got 25 stacks of stability. Well, I've got bad news for you, buddy, okay? That's fear now, okay? Oh, yeah, you know, well, I know, this actually did get rectified, but, like, oh, that beautiful moment when, like, resistance corrupted to immobilize, wow. I mean, that was just...
Don't tell me about that. That was not a fun engaging experience.
That was amazing game design right there. That was so much fun.
Wait, CMC is hanging his head in shame. Were you responsible for that?
No.
Okay.
I don't...
Okay.
The boon rip table was created long before I even worked at ANET, so...
And you know, this is again something that I think is probably pretty unlikely to happen. So you know, this might be a bit of a conversational dead end here, but I think one possibility, or one, you know, maybe fantastical possibility, I suppose, would be you know, maybe you actually change in world versus world the interaction between like corrupts and removals with regards to boons, right? So if you've got 25 stacks of stability, like, you know, before it gets turned into fear, maybe you need to get hit by 3 corrupts or something like that. You know, like it doesn't get rid of the entire stack in one go, right? Now, I imagine that would be an absolute nightmare for the developers to actually implement. So, you know, that's maybe maybe a bit of a
server lag
fantastical
alongside
thing.
it.
Well, I mean, I love the server lag. The server lag is amazing. It's beautiful, but it's not. You know, that's another thing that got changed in World versus World, and
That's true.
It's been doing a good job. I'm sure that CMC and Ben have been playing World versus World a little bit, and you know, gathering the data up on that as well to reduce the lag. But yeah, back to like kind of the interaction thing. And if you can't say, obviously, we can simply move on there. But is that kind of interaction or potential, you know, changing of that interaction, is that a possibility within the context of World versus World only?
I'd say it's pretty unlikely, like changing the functionality of how corrupts work. But obviously, like, this doesn't help stability to fear, but reducing the effectiveness of the corrupt is something that we can split pretty easily. So if something like you're getting too much, man, I don't even remember my corrupt table that well. But like, we can reduce the amount of weakness you get, we can reduce the amount of vulnerability you get. The things that are applied can be reduced, but the functionality of how corrupts work is very unlikely to change.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And the other kind of main thing right now that I think kind of perhaps plagues World versus World a bit is, of course, still the infamous Winds of Disenchantment. It is still going strong, right? Like, despite what a few players have been saying that Spellbreaker is useless in World versus World, that is a questionable thing to say.
Saw that in chat earlier.
Not sure about that. Not sure about that one, but you know, Spellbreaker is still going. It's a very, very powerful effect. Still existing there as well, and this is actually a very, very difficult one, I think, for the ArenaNet Balance team to handle, actually, because it still has its usages in the other game modes, like particularly certain bosses in PvE, right? You can use it to completely prevent any boons from being applied there. It has uses there. So addressing it in a meaningful way can be quite difficult outside of making it just kind of crappy, right? You know, like if you made it 3 targets, that would be like, oh, well, this isn't very good, right? It's a real difficult one because the effect is so strong.
Bubble effect just had 1 target.
Yeah.
That's
this gets
dream,
1
right?
person. Yeah, that is the dream. Oh.
Leader focus.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You just run right onto the enemy leader with a bubble,
Target,
and then boom,
target
there you
the leader,
go.
boom.
Yeah,
That's fantastic.
Targeted skill now makes so much sense. I mean, obviously, like, wins is a hot topic for World v World, and there's been a lot of discussion. I mean, sometimes on the Wolva stream we talk about it. Sometimes in various discords we talk to a bunch of people about wins. And I mean, there's room to maybe change the functionality of the skill. Obviously, it would be a game-wide change, but we do see the impact of the skill, and we do see like the gameplay that it creates. I know the meme is that you just hold W and you just run at people. It's not the most exciting gameplay moment, and the counterplay of like corrupting the stability on the channeler so you can get that interrupt is a little bit more difficult when there's just a blob of people. It is hard to get the correct target, so maybe the counterplay there is not as available as it needs to be. So I don't think there's really a good split for wins that feels good. I mean, target cap can just keep coming down and doesn't feel great. At some point, the skill is probably unplayable. I think we want that type of effect to exist, and it's just a question of making it feel good, making it feel balanced, and if there's a functional change that makes sense. I mean, honestly, the channel probably makes it less viable in other modes. Like, I don't want to channel Winds of Disenchantment on my PvE boss. I don't know, maybe you do. I try to avoid talking about PvE because I don't know anything about it, so I don't like to talk about PvE balance. But like the old bubble of drop it on the ground and then I can do stuff on top of that. That's definitely something we talk about. Should it go back to that functionality for World v World? And then obviously across the game as well, because I mean it kind of feels better for all modes in that sense. But there's just more discussion that needs to happen around wins. But I mean we're pretty aware of. I mean this is one of the premier pain points it feels like for the game mode, so it's worth investigating functional changes if they need to exist.
It might be a little bit inevitable. Maybe it needs to like grow bigger. It starts out very small and then gets bigger, or something of that nature. Right? Could be a potential solution.
Greatsword 4.
Yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, that could work. Maybe I guess. Yeah, it could expand every second and to compensate, have like a slightly longer duration to account for that, like potentially as well. Like you could definitely go in that direction, and that might make it a little bit easier to counterplay around it, right? Like if it grew there as well. But yeah, okay. I mean, I think the only thing is, and I think I'm kind of loath to suggest this because this is a lot harder to do. Like to change the functionality to, instead of making it just means you can't reapply boons, it simply reduces the duration of incoming boons, right? That would actually mirror the Guild Wars 1 functionality of that ability as well. So it would instead say give you like a 66% reduction in incoming boon duration on you if you're affected. But I think that's a bit more of a difficult change to implement, and maybe less viable, at least in the short term, right? Because of the nature of the balance changes we can get through, like, that can be implemented by CMC here. So there is that. But kind of moving on here, a little bit here to moving along. Now, we've dodged around the elephant in the room here for a long time in World vs. World, but now it is time to address the elephant. Okay, there are certain classes, guys, that have a bit of a tough time in Zergs right now. This has been a pretty long-standing problem. I want to say basically the entire lifespan of the game has had issues around this. I mean, I think Rangers are perhaps an oppressed minority in the World vs. World scene, not having a good time, but a lot of other classes really do struggle to find their place in this large-scale play. Like Ranger, Thief, Chrono, kinda, honestly. Like, Chrono is like, oh yeah, you only want me for my veil and my portal. That's all it really has there. A lot of these builds don't really have like a full.
You could run Grav while on Chrono.
Yeah, Chrono is better now, actually. Like Chrono actually is better, and the new domination line is actually helping Chrono a lot because it has a lot of boon rip potential there. So you can kind of see stuff kind of coming, kind of coming together there. But there are still a lot of classes that don't really have a functional build for the kind of the large scale Zerg World versus World play.
Wait, I remember some GVG footage of I think it was Cran playing Soul Beast to one-shot people, and I think that Soul Beast might be the way to go for Ranger to bring that in. Obviously with slightly more melee pushes occurring now, it does have the option, but at the same time, stance share could be the way to go for that. The stances do bring some value, particularly the elite, and well, if we saw that in play, I think that would be pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's for sure. And the class that really does need in my opinion, like an alternative or something that can, in a way, do the same thing is the Firebrand, right? Like the Guardian has been the backbone of World vs. World for too long. Okay, it's just the only thing that can really do what it does, like with the amount of stability it brings to the table and Soul Beast maybe could have gone there, right? You saw the Dolyax. I was like, oh my god, it's Guardian 2. But yeah, no. Not yet, anyway. And it has a lot of very interesting things, like, the stance share makes you immune to immobilize and movement. So that's pretty powerful effect, right? Gives you damage reduction as well, but it didn't really manage to come through there. And this is the time that I'd kind of love to hear your thoughts on this, CMC. Like, is it, do you want to see a bit more diversity in the Zerg gameplay, or do you think it's actually okay? As I think you could definitely make a defensible argument that it's kind of okay that some classes are a little bit more niche in the blob scenarios and are more suited for roaming and smaller scale world versus world gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unlikely that every spec is going to have a Zerg viable class, Zerg viable build, but it would be nice if every profession as a whole had at least one way to play with the Zerg or play as a roamer. Just like, I mean, diversity is always better, right? I mean, if you ask me if I want to see more diversity, the answer is never going to be no. Like that, this doesn't really make sense. How we get there is the more exciting part of that problem, and it's not necessarily the case that everything will be able to be brought up to the level of the meta classes, but trying to make it so that they just don't feel bad. It's more of like having viability versus optimal and kind of shrinking the distance between the two. It would be nice. I mean, the stability thing, giving more classes access to AoE stability in a more realistic manner to kind of relieve the pressure of needing to have Guardians everywhere. Sounds great. It's just a matter of finding the places that make sense. Like, does stance share need to be larger radius? Does stability mantra on Mesmer need a larger radius? A lot of this is going to be functional changes, though, to like bring classes that don't really have a role. Like, if you don't have a role, you're not necessarily going to get a roll from numbers going up. Like, I guess we could just buff Barrage until it one-shot everybody, and then you could play your Longbow Ranger in Zergs, right? But that's not really the direction that we would like to go. Although, something that we talked about on the Wovo stream this week, which I guess I'll just reiterate here, because why not? It's out there in the world. Retaliation damage is coming down with the next patch in both PvP and World v World, coming down a bit.
Okay.
So maybe I can spam my barrage and maybe get some piercing rapid fires or something, and not just get 100-0'd by retail.
Nice.
Maybe, probably not. But like those larger like multi-hit attacks that just get destroyed by retaliation obviously feels bad. The retail change is more because of how much damage it does relative to everything else. Given that retail was not touched in February, damage came so much further down everywhere else that a much larger percentage of damage was coming from retaliation, which is not really what we want to see. Like, it's not the most exciting way to deal damage.
Yeah, sure.
It is for PvP and World v World, not PvE. So
you can still tank damage from bosses to get them with a retail, so don't worry about that, guys.
Yeah, you can still get your huge retail damage on bosses when they attack you one time.
Yeah,
500 damage, 400 damage. So I mean, that type of thing. Maybe like Grenade NG or like Barrage Ranger. Now you can play them in Zerg without getting just
flamethrower in World v World.
Yeah, flamethrower.
The goal of that change is not really to make those things viable, but it would be. I mean, Barrage is like the thing that Ranger doesn't have a whole lot of AoE pressure, right? I mean, you have Barrage, and to have value in the Zerg fight, you do need like more AoE value. And then, I mean, we've seen a lot of feedback about like Emob from Ranger and how much there is, and how there might even be too much access to immobilize. And so like Ranger doesn't need to be the AoE pressure. Maybe it is like this more of AoE CC or utility, something else that I can do, and like getting maybe the stance share stability as a more viable option. The solution for Ranger doesn't need to be AoE damage, but like, yeah, it definitely feels like Ranger is kind of left out of large scale combat right now. And I mean, Thief to a lesser extent, but I've seen a lot of, maybe not a lot, but people talk about Staff Thief as like maybe the Zerg Thief, and I don't have a lot of personal experience with how effective it is. I know that it is maybe, I mean, if you're trying to play with the Zerg, maybe you are playing that Staff Thief. And so that's probably the direction that makes more sense. Like, we're not going to have Backstab Thief be relevant in a Wolfla Zerg ever. I don't think that's really something that's even feasible to look at. So, but Staff is like the more natural AoE option. And whether or not Vault does too much damage by itself, sure. But like I said, more diversity is always better. Some of these things are going to need functional changes to give them a better role for that type of gameplay. But I would love to see more diversity. And then bringing down the overperformers, whatever flavor of Necro build ends up still being the best damage, the best kind of pressure spec for your Zerg. Having other things that can either be brought up or bring Necro down a little bit, bring Firebrand's support down a little bit, so that it's less of a do everything, and just opening the door for other things absolutely makes sense. So like the things that already have viable mechanics, we want to tune as we can up and down to diversify options. Obviously, like that's literally the point of balancing the game, is to create more build diversity, bring down overperformers, bring up underperformers. And then as things don't have functionality, then we need to evaluate like what role are we trying to get for this class? How do we get there? And that's probably a much larger project for World v World, where the best classes are so, I mean, they're so good at what they do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it would be, as you say, like more diversity is always going to be a good thing there. It will make the game, more enjoyable for everyone. We don't have to kick Rangers on site anymore, which will be, will be an enjoyable experience indeed.
All Rangers are kicked.
And again, this is a little outside the scope of the discussion, but I think that the expansions and elite specializations are a really good way to potentially address some of these issues, because it allows you to introduce a new weapon to that, and new class mechanics, right, which can kind of enable a playstyle that a profession doesn't have with its baseline kit and some of the current elite specializations. So that might be something that we'll end up seeing there. Of course, you kind of saw that with the attempt with Soul Beast to have this AoE group support there. It didn't quite work out there. But on the other hand, there's a possibility there that when you bring in these new elite specializations, you get a new weapon, right? Like instead of just having to like kind of run around in circles with greatsword, right, on Ranger, you're like, oh, okay, well, this isn't that good, is it, right? You can have a weapon that's more suited, right, to a blob playstyle that can kind of give it a bit more room to exist there. Well, also, and new playstyles are always fun, right? But we won't get into that, because obviously that's not kosher for this one, I'm afraid. But you know what? Also, I'm going to trigger for you. Are you guys ready for me to trigger the chat here? Okay, about World versus World. And by the way, just very quick note. Yes, guys, we are going to have a bit of a question segment after this, so stay tuned for that. So don't worry, hold your questions, think of them, and we'll answer the ones we can, right? And we'll talk about what questions we can answer a little bit later. But look, I'm about to trigger you guys. Okay. Condis suck in World versus World right now. They are very bad. They are actually
back for this every Wolfla stream. Someone always asks about Condis, and then like, I mean, go ahead. Sorry,
but yeah, no. I mean, you are correct in that sentiment there. Conditions are in a bad situation currently, and I know a lot of people don't like playing against Condi, right? I know conditions are not that popular, but they are an important aspect of the game. And hear me out, guys. I think power being meta on basically every class is actually a really big problem. I think it actually enabled why Scourge was so degenerate, actually, right? Because if you kind of run power on Necro, that means not only are you getting like instant boon corrupt, you're also getting instant mega spike, right, as well with the power. If you were kind of quote unquote like forced to run Condi on Necro, right, that means that you'd have slower damage output, but you'd also have that boon pressure, right? So you wouldn't have this massive spike damage, which is obviously really good in World vs. World, right? Because you want to kill people instantly, right? That's good, right? but you also have the boon rip as well, right? And having that trade-off, I think, would make the game a lot healthier, actually. In that context, there is on. Yeah, I know about roaming. Trailblazer Mirage. I mean, yeah, enjoy that one, boys. Okay, have fun with that, right? Yeah, not good.
Roaming's
obviously.
dead.
Yeah. Whoa, that's a hot take right there. Huge.
It's not even
take.
a hot take. It's just real take.
Yeah, it's a brutal take.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, also yeah, I see that. The Angels. But anyway, yeah. So I think a lot of this does come down to Scrapper, as the chat is correctly pointing out. Their purity of purpose combined with the massive cleanse output from the Scrapper is definitely a problem. But I think the concern is the chat has also once again correctly pointed out that if you kind of get rid of all the cleanse, then suddenly like the domination of immobilize is here, you know, like that, and that is like, ugh. Yeah, that.
I mean, it goes back to what we were
problem.
saying earlier. Does removing stability, does removing like boons and all conditions and cleanses and strips and all that, does that actually make world versus world better? Like, I just, it is such a, you know, amalgamation right now of all this stuff that has created what it is, and I just don't see it getting any better by attacking any of these specific factors. You'd have to reduce all of them by a significant margin, which would take a lot of work to try and work out which, you know, how far on each. And it's just not going to help anything. It doesn't do anything better. You know, we're not going to ever get back to the stage of core where we had a focus party and a melee group and the range party, because the skills themselves have evolved beyond that what we had back then as is. So it just isn't going to change. It's not going to change anything. It's just going to be slower, in which case that can be dealt with slowly over time.
Yeah. Exactly. You don't want to get overly nostalgic, right? Like you know, the game has evolved. Classes have more advanced kits right now, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing.
I think a lot of people have very fond memories of Heart of Thorns as well, right? And that was after the first round of elite specializations, which, you know, they had some powerful effects there. You know, that's certainly true. So you can absolutely have a little bit more complexity, a little bit more energy there as well. With some of the stuff, and still have the game intense, but it does feel a little bit weird. And I know exactly where you're coming from there, Angels, with saying that, you know, it might make world versus world worse if you make conditions better, or you kind of nerf the cleanse uptime, you nerf the conversion. So it might make the game worse. But I do think it is a little bit weird that in this game mode, only half of the kind of damage output actually kind of does anything, right? Like it's kind of forsaking a really big part of the game's mechanics that feels a little bit off.
I disagree. Condis definitely have their place, right? Like, if you are caught without cleanses, you will die to conditions. Okay, you know, and that's not to say that conditions shouldn't. I don't know. I don't feel conditions being more powerful actually does anything helpful. Okay, like not even just for the specific. The general issue of Condis being underrepresented, but there are enough Condis going out when it is a purely power-based meta, mainly power-focused meta, as is for people to die to them. That is a reality. It's why you have to run cleanses.
Yeah,
as is.
I think
so,
it might just be a case that, you know, power is very, very dominant, you know, rather than the conditions themselves are okay, but it's more like, I mean, yeah, like a good example is Burn God, right? Like if you're up against a disorganized squad, like Burn God is absolutely insane, right? So I do think a lot of this does come down to Scrapper, to be honest. Okay, I'm gonna bully Scrapper, dude. Get it out of here.
I'm gonna give you a hard take.
Okay, let's go, dude.
More condition pressure in World v World is unfun. It's straight up unfun. Okay, you die to like burns or whatever. Oh, you know, I just died. Like there's no. This is the issue with a lot. Like you have to buff them to such an extreme that you have something like 30 stacks of burning on you. Okay, or whatever, and then you just die, and you're like, okay, you know what? That's not skillful. Like I just ran through like loads of purging flames. Like that's not fun.
What's the difference between that though and getting hit by like 3 hammer 2s on Rev?
I mean, hammer 2 is an incredibly unfun mechanic as it is, because it's just stupid. But It's different because the hammer 2 is instantly dodgeable, whereas the 5 sets of purging flames or whatever, which you stack up to like, I don't know, 20 burn stacks or whatever, is inherently unfun because I didn't get cleansed, or because I can't cleanse, or my group didn't cleanse. Like, it doesn't give, like, because World v World is so group focused, you know, you can't just run loads of Condis like and condition cleanse on your own build to deal with all the conditions that are spammed. There's never going to be that state where you give anatomy, like, autonomy to the player to be able to avoid all the condition output there is, if that makes sense.
That can certainly be a problem with application here, but
yeah,
I mean, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think you have to be really careful with some of this stuff. I think power can be like, even I would argue that power it can be even more degenerate than Condi in the way it plays out, okay? Right? Like, Condi has more counterplay than power, right? Like that is very important to note here.
Yes and no, right? Okay. Like, for the individual player, no, not at all. Okay, and this is kind of what I'm saying. All right. No, because it's straight up.
That is debatable. That is debatable.
For the individual player, you straight up have less ability to counter Condis than you do power in World v World. Okay, in power in World v World, you just dodge, or you like whatever. Okay,
just dodge.
You literally just dodge. Okay, but conditions. Okay, you have to cleanse them. Okay, because conditions are actually applied mainly through pulsing. Okay, like, let's be real here. They're applied through pulsing and all that sort of stuff. And as soon as you have those on you, you have something like 30 conditions, and you cannot counter them all. You're chilled, you're crippled, because of just inherent, like, all these condition classes do apply this, like particularly Necro. And after that, you have so many cover Condis on you that you're actually unable to cleanse a lot of the damaging conditions. Okay, because no class has enough cleanses available to them. No individual class has enough cleanses available to them.
This is true.
Apart from the specific support classes. So if you're a Necro, have fun, basically. That's what it comes down to. This is
definitely true. There's some issues there. Like, there's a lot of AoE spam there as well. But like, this is like pretty equally applicable to most things, and I think this is probably a little bit of a dead end here. I think on this conversation.
It is a dead end, right.
But I don't know. Like, I would say it's kind of equally the case there with all that stuff. But yeah, this doesn't really matter here. Like, and you know, we gotta. I think we actually do want to be a little bit cautious on time here as well. I think we want to get on some questions pretty much immediately. But so I think we'll actually I will let CMC have kind of the final word regarding, like, condition balance and like damaging condition damage being potentially maybe a little bit more relevant in World Buzzer before we take a few questions there and then kind of cap off the stream, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, looking at it from a design point of view, it would be great if Condi and Power were both viable without feeling oppressive. But kind of how we talked about stability earlier, maybe the design goal isn't necessarily healthy for the game mode, and it's kind of an unknown. There is room to give more personal cleanse for World v World specifically. If that's the direction we want to go, we want to reduce the power of some of the AoE cleanse available and give more agency to each individual player to mitigate Condis. It's a possible direction. There is the possibility that maybe as Angel says, that condition gameplay is just not necessarily the most healthy way to have level of function, and that's a possibility. I don't think we have the data to support that conclusion at this point, so it's worth investigating how we can enable conditions a bit more. And then if we need to up cleanses, if there's obviously a large amount of work that needs to happen around, I mean, it's an entire damage type that is not really viable. But ideally, you can play conditions, you can play power, and as long as the gameplay feels good, that's the direction we should try to push towards. And that doesn't feel like the case right now. And obviously, like, the less organized your group is, the fewer people you have, small scale, conditions are more and more powerful and completely unviable in the most organized, most optimized situations. It's a very interesting problem in that sense to solve, but it's worth investigating, and I think there's a lot of initial investigation that needs to even happen before changes in that direction start happening. But it's worth the investigation, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, that really does cut to the nub of the issue there. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right now, in my opinion, World Buster is actually a lot of fun. Like the Scourge change, making it a lot less oppressive, kind of enabling a more melee playstyle, more Reapers, right? Still making Scourge okay, right? And you see a lot more pushing going on there instead of groups kind of posturing, looking at each other for a long time. I think it definitely does make the game. It's made the game a lot better. So it's fun, right? And maybe that's fine. You know, it doesn't necessarily. There's no reason as such why every playstyle has to be good in a Zerg context. I'm perfectly okay with the game as it is right now. So yeah, I think that's a good way to put it and a good way to kind of conclude the discussion.
It comes back to more diversity is generally a good thing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if the current meta feels good, then it's good to hear. I think personally, I feel like a lot of people are trying stuff out, and I mean, I've only played a little bit of World v World, and I don't get to play with like the most organized, high level players. I end up following Teapot around.
Wow.
Ow. I mean, clearly CMC hasn't folled Girl Wars.
Yeah, I mean that's where the real high level stuff is. You know, you gotta get in on that action, right? It's pretty good.
I definitely like to get a lot of feedback from a lot of the higher level World v World players for sure, because that's valuable opinions, and I mean, it is something that I'm a bit less well versed in. Like as I picked up competitive balance, I've been trying to learn as much as I can about World v World, but I don't have like the 7 years of PvP experience that I had as a player to kind of give me the best foundation. So I am still learning a lot about the game mode, and getting those like premier resources is absolutely invaluable.
For sure. So I think that kind of wraps things up then for kind of the broader discussion. I think we've got a little bit of time here. I think Angel actually has to go fairly soon, so let's make use of this time and get a few questions in here, guys. If you have anything that you would like us to address, okay, go ahead and put that, guys, okay, in the chat now. We'll see if we can go ahead and answer it, guys. Let's go ahead and see what we're going to bear in mind. I just want to make this clear, guys. We are only able to discuss questions with regards to basically skill splitting and competitive and world buster butts, not game design and not alliances, guys. Okay, this is about balance, particularly in competitive, right? And I'm sure we can talk about stuff a little bit with trait and skill functionality, but in general, it's going to have to be a little bit more around specific, maybe around a particular build or a particular design philosophy, okay? Like, we might not be able to answer your question if you just say, when is the expansion coming? We can't do that one, right? We can't do
CMC,
that.
when's the expansion coming, buddy?
Wow. Angels, just ignore
I mean,
it
just was
trouble.
Well, I mean, there's the question answered,
like,
right?
When it comes to functionality stuff, like, a lot of people send me feedback about functional changes that they like to see, and I am totally fine, like, receiving that. It's just something that I personally do not action. Like, I pass along feedback to the skills team a lot, and we talk about functional changes that make sense a lot. But at the end of the day, the greatest impact that we can have is trying to push forward with skill splits, because those are very easy to implement. They're very easy to push through in a much shorter turnaround. And so I personally try to focus on splits as much as I can, even if there's functional changes that make sense. I do like to see those and like have all the information. So like we can talk about functional changes, but it's just more valuable to try to do what we can with splits because of the simplicity of and the ease of doing those things. But I mean, anyone who wants to send me feedback, feel free. And if you have functional change feedback, I do pass that along when I can. But it, again, is not something that I personally action. So I can't really say, oh, great idea, like let's do that, because it's not a call that I get to make.
Here's a question we could probably do. It is about 10 target stuff. So when it comes to traits and abilities that affect 10 targets, like particularly in stuff like world versus world, is that something we want to see more of, or is it something that's maybe going to get brought down because, as the power creep is being reduced, having this effectively double effectiveness on your shouts, right, or on facets, that sort of thing? Is that something that that is likely to actually be more prevalent in the context of world versus world, or is it going to be something that maybe potentially gets toned down?
I'd say it's more likely to be toned down. Like, we brought a lot of the 10 target stuff already down to 5 targets, and there's a handful of things that are all tied to traits, like the Revenant Facet is a good example, that we didn't really want to just rip out that trait functionality, even though it is on the table. Like, that's literally what we did to Sand Savant, right, is we ripped out the target cap functionality, but we don't want to just do that to every single trait that gives a target cap increase, but we do prefer seeing 5 targets as kind of the high end. It just, looking back at way back in the day, 5 targets was the norm, and 10 targets has kind of been pushed more and more as probably more of a function of raid groups, and has heavily influenced WoW gameplay just because, hey, there's a lot of people here, 10 targets is better than 5. But getting that essentially 100% effectiveness increase is kind of absurd, and it is just, as you say, more power creep, more powerful. And I think having things function around a target cap of 5 is closer to where we want to be. So these traits, we talk about them a lot. How can we adjust them so that they don't need the target cap increase? So that we could potentially even just roll that in baseline, 10 targets baseline on facets, split down to 5 for World v World. That's a possibility. We haven't pulled the trigger on a functional split there like we did with Sand Savant, but it is a possibility, because if we don't find the right change for that trait to kind of make it feel good without that as a component, maybe it makes sense as a functional split there, because we've tried to bring as much down to 5 targets as we can, and there's just a few outliers left.
Okay, that makes sense. And here's a bit of a general one, actually. This is a really interesting question. Is there a build in PvP right now that you consider to be like the power level that you'd like to see across the entire game, on every like the baseline, right? That's what you want to see a build exist as the standard for balance in PvP.
I chuckled because I was going to say DDLE again, like I've said like 50 times over the course of the stream. Going like core DDLE, just living in the past of 2014. But I haven't honestly played it enough. The first thing I try, every balance update, I just go play some games with core DDLE, like Fire, Water, Arcana, or Air, Water, Arcana. I'm like, all right, it's finally time to bring it back. And it's just, it's obviously never true, because it's not quite up to snuff with a lot of the things that exist right now. So I can't say that's like the ideal, because I don't have enough time playing it in this meta. But I don't know. It's a weird question. Like, it's a sensible question for sure. I like the question, but I don't know if I have played enough things to really say that. I would say like the current state of Warrior is not bad, but it's probably honestly just still a little bit higher. Like, I'm not saying Warrior's going to get nerfed, because that doesn't make sense. But if you look at any build in the meta that is either meta or even close to meta, like I feel Warrior's pretty close. And depending on how you feel about that, it may or may not be pretty close. But there are things that you could nerf on Warrior that make sense, given like the philosophy that we're trying to push and the power level we're trying to get to. There are things on Warrior you could still bring down. So I wouldn't say that Warrior is necessarily the gold standard, but it feels pretty good from the Warrior games I played. I played a lot more core than Spellbreaker recently.
Core, I feel was very fair.
Yeah, like tactics strength feels pretty good. It's obviously not meta or anything, but it does not feel bad. I would not be sad for more builds to be around that power level. But I wouldn't try to say that there's a particular spec that is the gold standard for balance right now, other than obviously core DDLE. But
that's the true gold standard, right?
So, like, that's just a meme.
Yeah.
So.
The eternal gold standard of balance there, exactly. Here's a pretty interesting one, actually. Is there any playstyle in PvP that you find is missing? Is there some kind of build or some kind of strategy that you'd like to see in high level, particularly high level gameplay, like automated tournament gameplay?
In terms of strategy?
Yeah, like is there a role that's missing or a strategy that doesn't see play or just doesn't exist in Guild Wars?
I don't know if there's something that doesn't exist. I mean, it's always the balance between the things that are fairly well known, like roaming comps versus teamfight comps versus bruisers versus support characters. Like the diversity and decisions that you can make aren't really at the same level. I don't know if there's necessarily something that's missing. I mean, you could look over the history of the game, and all of the metas have had kind of like their share of something. Like, I wouldn't say that we ever want to see Bunker Chrono again, but like the tanky sidenoder more than like tanky, not a high sustain sidenoder is. I wouldn't be sad to see like any different style or any previous style that has existed. We just need to make sure that it feels okay and it's like not unhealthy. Like if you look at, I mean, over the history of the game, like I said, there's in terms of specs, there's a lot of things that have been existing and aren't necessarily as good right now. That would be great to see. Like, I'd love to see Core DDLA. I'd love to see Berserker again. I'd love to see like all of these kind of old, more fair. Like it never feels unfair to die to like Condi Berserker or DDLE. But like, I mean, the sustain was too high, so it kind of felt unfair that you could never kill it if they played correctly. But that's kind of like the way that they inflicted damage to you was never unfair, and I think that's like the premier type of build we'd like to see. But, I mean, that doesn't really answer the question at all, so sorry. But I don't know if I wouldn't say there's a role that has never existed that needs to exist. I would just say like all of the things over the history of the game would be great to see those styles of play all at a similar level of viability.
I think I'd be inclined to agree. I think also it can be very difficult to kind of point out something that you don't know exists, if that makes any sense, right? It's a difficult question to answer. Like maybe in a year's time, we'll go like, oh my goodness, how could we have ever lived without this one build or this one role that is defining?
You look at 2013, like early 2013, the meta was your side noder AFKs on the node. You team fight 4v4 middle, and then there's two guys AFK on either side node. That was determined to be the optimal strategy at some point in the game's history. And obviously,
we saw that repeated a bit in Mota.
That's ridiculous, right? But like, things obviously change as the game develops, as players play the game more, and like that's always great to see. Like both as a designer and as a player, it's always I want to see the new innovations. As a player, I want to see the new innovations. How are you combating the meta? And like, sure, the top builds are the best for a reason, but like, what things are you trying? How do I punch through this kind of established metagame to do something more interesting, whether that's on the how I actually play the game or what build I'm bringing to the table. Like as a player, that's what I love to do in games is try to innovate and play a bunch of terrible things for the sake of, hey, maybe we find a diamond in the rough there, right?
Absolutely. And here is I've got two troll questions that I want to ask actually, but we've got one more serious question here as well.
I expected like a bunch of anime questions, honestly. So
well, people
no, anime's banned, so no questions.
We've got it filtered out in the chat, so like we're safe from that. You know, we're okay. But for the last serious question is, do you have a priority on where you look to feedback? Do you look at, is it mostly from automated tournaments, or is it like a lot of ranked there as well? Like, and is there like a priority with regards to like the skill level as well? Like how much does high level play, like low level play, organized automated tournament gameplay factor into your evaluation of the game's balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to evaluate everything kind of on each individual level. Things perform differently, and if something's oppressive at a certain skill level, but completely unviable as you go higher and higher, that's still something that we want to be able to take action on. And sure, it sucks to maybe nerf something that is already not viable at high level because it is oppressing the less organized. Even just like high level ranked is completely different from ATs, but we always want to I guess, remove things that are unfun and oppressive and reduce those, bring them closer, bring them back down to earth. And as that kind of affects the same build in different skill levels, we need to reevaluate and see, how do we take this build that was already bad and we actually nerfed it? How do we actually give it something more valuable to do such that it becomes more viable at high level? And like, this is not an easy problem. I'm not saying that we just magically do this every update. It's like, oh, we're just going to make this change and it's going to make this build fixed to this skill level, but it's also now playable at this skill level. That's kind of the ideal. The ideal is that anything that's oppressive, that just doesn't feel good. We talked about this a little bit earlier with like Condi Rev resistance, where so much resistance just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel fun, even regardless of the balance. That it's worth adjusting things like that, and then reevaluating how additional things need to happen on top of that. And then everyone's going to call me out for like not touching resistance in the July update, which is totally fair. Like, this is a good time to say it, that I'm not always right, and like the skills team's not always right. We're always going to make decisions for a reason, and like, if you ever have a question about why a certain change was made or why another change was not made, always feel free to reach out to me and ask me, because every decision is made for a reason. Sometimes the reason is incorrect, and I mean, that's just how things are. Like, that's, no one is perfect, no one is always correct in the world, as well as with balance. So yeah, we kind of dropped the ball in terms of, well, Condi Rev resistance is not fun, so it should have been nerfed in the July update instead of trying to balance the build around other things. Yeah, I think that's correct, and that's why we are kind of reevaluating that change more quickly, and we're touching a few of the resistance traits in the next patch, and then if Condi Rev is now unplayable, well, we need to bring it back up. But we do want
a leak.
There you go. It's a leak. I didn't tell you the exact changes,
guys.
Resistance on Condi Rev is reduced in the next update as well. Because it just feels oppressive to condition builds, right? It's like, I can never do anything against this character. It's just not. It's not creating the interesting gameplay that we want. And so, I mean, that was kind of a tangent from the original question as to where feedback is gathered. But we do look at feedback from like all different levels and then try to react accordingly. We definitely look at match data. Like, I look at a lot of match data for both ranked and ATs. That stuff is okay. I honestly prefer conversations like this, like whether it's with two of you or with a bunch of other people in Discord, or having people like send me documents with their thoughts. Like, I prefer having more of a dialogue about the game, because at the end of the day, the decisions are made based off. I mean, when I'm looking at splits, I guess you could say it's based off my current opinion of things, but my current opinion is not based solely off my own data. Like, sure, I get data from playing the game, I get data from looking at match results and tournament results and all that type of thing, but feedback, player feedback, and yes, that also affects like my decision making. Like, having all the data allows you to make better decisions. So I think getting feedback from everywhere, whether it's forums, which we definitely read the forums a lot.
Oh no.
People are going to say, so here's the thing. You can talk about like the quality of feedback that you're going to get from the forums, or the quality of feedback that you're going to get from a lower level player. And I'm not saying that I look at a change that says, this is the worst thing of all time, please destroy it. And it's like complete, like someone's probably complaining about, say, like trap DH or something. Sure, right? Like, it's not the case that we read that forum post or we read that feedback and say, okay, we're now
right? Yeah.
trap DH. It's just another data point that influences decision making. It's like, okay, it's probably true that at lower levels, like, this is more of a problematic build, and it's like, is there something that needs to be it's generally going to fall to a lower priority, and I wouldn't expect to like nerf trap DH anytime soon, even if it is more oppressive at lower levels. But I mean, I more try to evaluate feedback in a vacuum and like independent of the source, right? Like, it doesn't matter who's telling me something about the game. They could just be right. Like, a bronze player can have accurate feedback about the problems of the game, and just disregarding everything that is written on the forums or disregarding everything that comes from a lower level player is not really correct. It's more of evaluating feedback on its merit as opposed to its source. And so we do gather feedback from a lot of places in it. I mean, it all just jumbles around.
Yeah.
And we have like documents, internal documents where I like make notes to myself, and when we go to look at what are the actual changes that are going to be made, that is when like we kind of coalesce all the data and figure out, okay, these are the changes that are going to be made. But we gather more data just informs better decisions is my opinion on this.
Sure.
So I try to get data from as many sources as possible. And I love doing stuff like this. Like the Q&A stuff is fun, but just the back and forth discussion between you guys. I've had these conversations with like a handful of players as well. Just having like that roundtable discussion is super valuable. Like getting more feedback, more data. And I mean, I don't want to call anyone out, but like you get just as ridiculous like proposals from the best. It's like, I'm not saying that this is wrong, but like even looking back at like the history of the game back when I was like, I never thought I was that good, but like, I mean, I played against the best players on a missed WTS by one match. I'm never salty about that ever, but I mean, there was a Skype group with the best players in the game, and the feedback in that Skype was some of the worst feedback that I've ever seen. Like everyone's trying to get their own class buff. It's like, all right, guys, how do we make it so that our comp is the best in the? And I'm not saying that players today do that, but there's definitely biases that come in. It's not that being a highly skilled player means that you're always correct. And I don't think anyone expects that to be true either, right? Like people understand that nobody's perfect, and we're always just trying to work together to make sure that the right data is being gathered so that the right decisions can be made. And that's kind of how I look at things. So I really value high level player feedback, and sometimes you have to disregard some things because it's nonsensical. But
because
that's just the worst class in the game.
So as a closing question before we do a quick meme question there as well, and this one, don't worry guys, this will be a relatively short one. What is the best way for the discerning player to give feedback on balance and share their thoughts? You mentioned the forums, but is that the best approach, or are there other ways that they can go about communicating with you and the skills team?
Yeah, I mean, the forums are a good starting point. Like, personally, I think it's harder to organize thoughts in forum posts a bit. Like, the thing that I'm really looking for from feedback is not necessarily the changes you want to see, but like the problems that you've identified, and really the reasoning behind it is the most important part. Because anyone can ship me a list of 50 patch notes that they're like, these should happen. But it helps a little bit, right? It's like, okay, I can kind of see where you're coming from, but I'm more interested to just see what are your thoughts? Why is this the case? And so doing just making a doc and then linking. I don't actually know what our forum rules are, but you can link me a document that you've written anytime. And I have looked through I've gotten a few documents from players that are pretty well reasoned. Some of them are maybe a little bit lighter on the reasoning, but that's fine. Like, I'm not expecting you to write a 50-page thesis on the current state of the game, but I do like to see
50-page thesis.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten a 50 page yet. No one's trying that.
No one's gone that
far. Would you read it if it was 50 pages?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would start reading it, and then if it was just a list of changes for 50 pages and not, I would evaluate the quality of the document based off the first few pages, right? And then if it looks good,
you can continue.
Absolutely read the whole thing. Like, I love that type of thing. And back in the day, everyone's forum post was titled whatever their name was, and it was like the so-and-so's document, and that was just their forum post title. And it would just be like, I mean, basically that format, right? Of like, here's how we look at the game, and like understanding like what level of game you play at, whether you're playing high level ATs or playing ranked at whatever rating. It's useful. It's not necessarily a requirement, but it does kind of help categorize things more. Like I said, I evaluate feedback more on its merit, but seeing a long document of complaints that are coming from maybe a mid-level or a high-level ranked player as opposed to the top-level AT. It's good to know that, and I could probably like infer that based off the changes that are being discussed. Because I mean, the metas are pretty different. I mean, there's a lot of the same builds, but the way that you play kind of influences how you interact with these things. So I could definitely kind of try to deduce where you're coming from based off that. But I mean, if you just say it, it's not going to influence my opinion of the value of the changes. It's just more useful for coordinating and organizing that feedback. So forums are good. I mean, if you can write a well-organized forum post or well-reasoned forum post, I'll probably run into it. I primarily read the PvP forums, so if you use the PvP subforum to talk about PvP balance, that is a lot more preferred than using the profession subforums, which are, I mean, they're supposed to be for the entirety of the game, but I find it's just an extra layer of having to sort through the PvP feedback versus the PvP feedback. It's more convenient if everything's just in the PvP forum, because it makes sense to talk about balance in the PvP forum anyway, so that's good. If you have me on Discord, you can just ping me directly.
Boom.
And consider that I'll probably ignore you for. Well, so the last couple of weeks have kind of been.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us about how long it took to organize? Yeah.
I started with the wrong portion of this, but because like if you ping me on Discord, I'm probably not gonna look during the day, almost certainly, because I have work to do, and I try to read Discord like evening, morning, before work, after work. But the last couple of weeks have honestly been crazy, and I've ignored a ton of Discord pings, so I apologize to anyone in this chat who's tried to get a hold of me.
I can't believe it.
But I will read everything eventually. So, and like as things are less crazy, I have more opportunity to like respond, even 24-hour, 48-hour, 72-hour turnaround, just to like let you know that if you send me a 50-page document, I'm not going to read it in one day and say, okay, here's my thoughts on that. But I'll say, okay, thanks. I'll take a look at this. So if you do ping me on Discord, just keep in mind that my entire life is not, unfortunately, balancing the game. So
that's fair. That's fair.
There's some amount of turnaround to be expected, but I do like that type of thing. And I mean, if you want to ping me directly on the forums, that's fine. Like if you have a document, if you want the everyone to see it, then post it on the subforum. Otherwise, you can message me, and I'll take a look that way.
And final question then. Okay, and here's the meme question. So yeah. Clayton Kisko says, "Why does he always clap you 1v1?
Ooh,
right, head to head, I believe."
That's a big expose.
Yeah.
Wait, is Clay in this chat, or is this from your Twitter?
This is from Twitter. Yeah, from Twitter. So it's
I saw that, and I thought it was a slightly different wording.
Yeah. What did he? I'll find the exact.
The exact question.
He said, "Ask him why he always loses to me head to head." Full stop.
Wow.
Well punctuated there as well.
Clayton made the mistake of he made the blunder of saying something that's just not true. Like he said that I have never beaten him head to head. That plays because we've actually never like 1v1. But when he says that I always lose, I have actually never lost. So it's just it's an error in his trolling efforts, unfortunately.
Yeah. Do we need to see a show match? That's the question.
I think we do.
I think we do. I think we need a show match 1v1 to happen here. ANET dev. Wait, do you guys have the kill an ANET dev achievement? Because you probably don't often encounter an enemy developer.
I don't think so. Maybe I have it.
Oh.
we need ANET dev grudge matches going.
Yeah.
I mean, I would crush Clay, and Clay understands this, so it's not really.
That's big. Wow.
But like I said, there was the opportunity to make the truthful statement of never beaten him because we've never actually battled. But I love Clay, the coolest guy ever. He was the lead on the Living World team that I was doing QA on, and he made my life really easy. So I'm a big fan of that guy.
Nice.
But he's not very good on PvP.
Ooh. Spicy.
I mean, you guys, he played on the Extra Life. You guys remember last year's Extra Life stream? He was playing like Condi Ranger or something. And the first match, he didn't have an amulet equipped, and he was like, "Wait, why can't I do anything?"
That's big. So I do believe, guys, that is just about going to do it and wrap things up. So, thank you guys so much for watching. A massive shout out to CMC for joining us here. I hope it was enjoyable and, you can put it to use in some way with that. But yeah, let's allow Angeels to do a quick outroduction, and then I'll give CMC the final word for just the kind of overall thoughts and overview of the whole podcast.
Yeah, so I'm Angeels, PvP streamer at twitch.tv/Angeels with 2 E's, creator of godsofpvp.net, that resource that is better than Meta Battle. And yeah, I'm just a fucking god tier scrapper, to be honest.
True.
What else can I say?
Not much, I guess.
Yeah.
DL Minecraft server owner as well. That's another
true.
big thing there.
That's another big thing, yeah. A lot of great characteristics to me. So yeah, you should check out
Consumer of anime, big weeb.
No, that's not true. You should check out my stream and subscribe.
Absolutely. I would highly recommend checking out Angeels' stream. There are a lot of very, very good content there. A lot of violence as well. So if you're into that sort of thing, definitely check that out. But yes, then, before I do a bit of shilling there. Okay, CMC, do you have any final thoughts or messaging you would like to send out there for the chat and to the player base then?
Yeah, I saw a few people in chat comment that I forgot to talk about the WoW forums as a place of viable feedback, and it's obviously that's just the PvP equivalent. If you have WoW feedback, WoW forums are a good spot for that. I tend to avoid saying PvP and World v World every time I say something that applies to PvP and World v World, which is unfortunate. I should probably just say competitive, but there's no competitive subforum, which is probably the best. And now I'm just rambling about random stuff that no one cares about. So that's the true CMC experience. If anyone remembers the time that I ranted for an hour about whether or not you should play Strength or Holbrack Rune on your DD Selly 5.5 years ago at this point, that gets off topic pretty quickly. But I definitely am prone to rambling, and I just like to talk about the game. So that's how it is. In terms of this, I'm happy to be here. Doing this type of thing is a lot of fun, and totally open to doing it more in the future, whether or not that makes sense for you or all the people involved. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But anytime you want to have another roundtable discussion like this, probably makes sense to do more often than every 5 months, which is about the cadence that we're on right now. I don't know how chat maybe feels about that. But like I said, I don't want to. I'm not trying to force you to do anything.
Onwards and upwards.
Pretty obnoxious, but I'm pretty available in terms of obviously it's more difficult to have more of a life these days with some sort of global pandemic affecting things. But not that I had much of a life before that happened, so. If you want to carve out a few hours on the weekend and talk about Guild Wars 2 balance, then totally
I'm always down.
And we could do it as often as we want.
Oh yeah, we'll see. We'll see what we can do.
We'll just gotta get the right sign-offs, because I think this has been pretty valuable. This time has been pretty valuable. The last time I did it, I enjoyed being here, so I will continue to appear at these whenever you invite me.
Wow. Indeed. Thank you very much indeed, CMC. And obviously, shout out to ArenaNet as well for facilitating this as well. That is, we are very, very grateful in the community, and, the efforts from the development team and from the partner team are absolutely very much appreciated. So, all that is left for me to say as Angeels simply leaves the room. He's done with us. He's completely done with us at this point. And it hurts. It does.
We can keep going. Angeels has to go.
Yeah, but we don't. Guys, do you want another 3 hours? Do you want to keep going? We can maybe do that. He's coming back. He's coming back. Oh no. Yeah.
The only thing I got is maybe in 6 hours. Gotta keep my running schedule. So.
But yes. So. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the stream. It's a possible, of course.
It's Teapot's fault, chat, that we're wrapping up. Just throwing it out there.
True. Yeah, that is actually a big true. But but there will be additional. I'm sure we'll get to the stuff organized once again there with more balanced podcasts, more balanced shows, and all that sort of stuff. So stay tuned for that. Follow the stream, guys. Okay, subscribe to the stream as well. If you have too much money, and some of it will be better off in my hands as well. Be ready to see, look, because this is very likely going to get posted on Reddit, guys. So, oh my goodness, get in there for that juicy Reddit thread debate action. But yes, Until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching. Really hope you enjoyed the stream. I'm going to go over to another stream right now. So enjoy that. Be sure to show them some love there as well. And tell them about how, and you know what, guys? Just prank them saying we're going to nerf their class, because that's extra enjoyable, right? Make sure that they think that their class is going to be terrible in the next patch there. But yes, guys, let's get a bit of appreciation in the chat for CMC. I want to see some claps. I want to see some peepo happies before we move over. But yes, that is all from us. Oh yeah, IAR as well. You know what? I'll allow that. You know, now we can have some maybe IAR clap. You know, IAR base, I believe, is also enabled, as far as I'm aware here in the chat. Yeah, we've got the both. I believe both of them are. But yeah, once again, guys.
Don't lie to me.
Wait, is it? Well, no, there's IAR weird. Sorry, you know, it's IAR weird and just IAR. Yeah, that's what we've got here. Maybe next time we can do IAR base as well. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful evening. Okay, leave us a good comment on YouTube if you have any thoughts on this discussion. But until then, thank you very much to the hosts here. We'll get the bot to link that there once again. But yeah, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful evening. And we'll see you later.
Twitch has not been live in like 2 years.
Look, we can always hope. We can only hope. But yeah,
I'm just chiming in so that I can ruin your outro. That was the whole plan.
You know, look, I wasn't going to point it out, but I'm definitely going to be, you know, like I'm going to give feedback to the partner program about this, and this will be coming up. Okay, I'm just saying. So you watch out, right? But yes, see you guys later. We're out. There we go. Right, we are out now.